When Selene Vale stepped onto the last subway train of the night, wearing a torn crimson sweater soaked in blood and rain, she didn't know the man who sat beside her would change everything. 5 years of captivity had taught her to disappear, to become invisible, to survive by never being seen. But Kael Min saw her anyway. And when her captor appeared on the platform with a hunter's smile, ready to drag her back into hell, the dragon-tattooed stranger rose from his seat and spoke words that shattered her world. She stands beside me now. That means she is untouchable. The silence that followed felt like the edge of a blade. Please follow this story to the end, hit like, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Dies. Rain hammered Blackridge City like the sky itself wanted to drown the streets. Water poured through rusted grates and flooded the subway entrances in torrents that turned concrete steps into waterfalls. The kind of storm that made people huddle inside doorways and pray the thunder would pass. The kind of night where nobody looked too closely at anyone else. Selene Vale stumbled down the subway stairs just after midnight, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the handrail to keep from collapsing. Her crimson sweater clung to her skin, heavy with rainwater and something darker that spread across the fabric in irregular patches. Blood. Some of it hers. Most of it from when she'd shoved him backward into the glass coffee table and run. She couldn't stop running, not yet, not until the train took her somewhere far enough that Damien Cross wouldn't find her in the next hour, or the next day, or ever again. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the turnstile, the faded handbag clutched against her chest like a shield that could actually protect her from anything. It couldn't, nothing could. She'd learned that lesson 5 years ago when Damien first smiled at her outside the community shelter and told her she didn't have to be alone anymore. Lies always sounded kindest in the beginning. The platform was nearly empty. A janitor mopping near the far end. An elderly woman asleep on a bench with grocery bags piled around her feet. 2 teenagers sharing headphones and ignoring the world. Nobody looked at Selene. Nobody ever did. Damien had trained her too well for that. Wear oversized clothes. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Disappear into corners. Become forgettable. She'd become so good at being invisible that sometimes she forgot she existed at all. The train screeched into the station with a metallic wail that echoed through the tunnels. Selene flinched at the sound. Her entire body coiled tight with panic. Every noise felt like Damien's footsteps. Every shadow looked like his silhouette. She stepped onto the train and collapsed into the corner seat near the door, pressing herself against the window as if she could melt through the glass and disappear completely. The bruise on her cheekbone throbbed. Thin cuts lined her forehead, where Damien had grabbed her hair and slammed her against the wall. Her ribs ached from where his boot had connected when she tried to crawl away. Every breath hurt. But she was moving. That had to count for something. The train lurched forward and rattled into the tunnel darkness. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow tones. The other passengers avoided looking at her. A man in a construction vest stared at his phone. A woman in scrubs slept with her head against the window. A college student with paint-stained fingers sketched something in a notebook. All of them pretended not to see the blood. Selene pressed her forehead against the cool glass and watched the tunnel walls blur past. Her reflection stared back at her like a stranger. Hollow eyes, pale skin, hair plastered to her skull in wet tangles. She looked like something dredged up from the bottom of a river. She looked exactly like what Damien had spent 5 years turning her into. Nothing. The train stopped at the next station. Doors opened. Nobody got on. Selene's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the platform, searching for any sign of him. Empty. The doors closed. The train moved again. She allowed herself one shallow breath of relief. Then the air inside the carriage changed. It happened so subtly that Selene almost missed it. The temperature dropped. The fluorescent light seemed dimmer. The construction worker looked up from his phone and quickly looked away again. The woman in scrubs shifted in her seat, unconsciously pressing herself closer to the opposite wall. Someone had entered the train. Selene didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes fixed on the tunnel darkness outside, but every muscle in her body went rigid with instinct. Prey recognizing a predator even before it appeared. Footsteps moved down the aisle, slow, deliberate, expensive shoes against scuffed linoleum. The footsteps stopped beside her seat. A man sat down, not across from her, not one seat over, directly beside her. Celine's breath caught in her throat. She still didn't look. Couldn't look. Her entire survival strategy for 5 years had been built on the principle of never drawing attention, never engaging, never giving anyone a reason to remember her face. But this man didn't seem to care about her strategy. He sat with the kind of stillness that felt more dangerous than movement, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself because everyone in the carriage already knew he was there. Selene could feel the weight of him in the space beside her, solid and immovable as a wall. She risked a glance. Midnight blue suit, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his frame. Tall, sharp-featured, black hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone. And tattoos. Black dragon tattoos that curled from beneath his collar and wrapped around his throat like living ink, disappearing beneath the expensive fabric. His hands rested on his knees. Long fingers. No rings. A silver watch that probably cost more than Selene had seen in her entire life gleamed under the fluorescent lights. This was not a man who rode the subway. This was a man who owned things. Kyle Min didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, his expression completely neutral, as if sitting beside a bleeding woman on a midnight subway train was the most ordinary thing in the world. But Selene could feel his awareness of her like heat radiating from a fire. He saw everything, the blood, the bruises, the terror vibrating through her bones, and he said nothing. The silence felt heavier than questions would have. The train rattled through another station without stopping. Express route. No exits for the next 3 stops. Selene's hands tightened around her handbag until her knuckles went white. She should move, stand up, walk to another seat. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. Fear had locked every joint in place. Kyle Min shifted slightly, adjusting his cuff. The movement was minimal, but it revealed more of the dragon tattoo winding up his wrist. Selene found herself staring at it. The design was intricate, beautiful, terrifying, like everything else about him. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried an undertone of controlled power that made Selene's stomach drop. This was not a man who offered help. This was a man who made statements and expected reality to rearrange itself accordingly. "I'm fine," Selene whispered. It was the most pathetic lie she'd ever told. Kyle Min turned his head then, and Selene felt the full weight of his gaze for the first time. Dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything in seconds. Not cruel, not kind, just impossibly focused, like he could see straight through skin and bone into the broken machinery underneath. "No," he said. "You're not." The train began to slow. Selene's blood turned to ice as she recognized the station approaching through the window. Transfer station. The one where she'd planned to switch lines and disappear into the night. But someone else had figured out her plan. The subway screeched to a stop. The doors slid open, and Damien Cross stood waiting on the platform. Selene's vision tunneled. Sound disappeared. Everything narrowed to the sight of him standing beneath the harsh white lights, hands in his pockets, smiling that terrible smile that had haunted her nightmares for 5 years. He'd found her. Of course he'd found her. Damien always found her. He stepped toward the train door, his smile widening. "There you are, baby. I was worried." The casual affection in his voice made Selene's skin crawl. He talked like a concerned boyfriend, like a man who'd been searching for his lost girlfriend all night. To anyone watching, it probably looked romantic. Nobody knew he kept her locked in the apartment for days at a time. Nobody knew about the bruises he hid under long sleeves and high collars. Nobody knew she wasn't allowed to have friends or leave without permission or speak to anyone without him standing right beside her. Nobody knew because Selene had learned not to tell anyone. Damien took another step forward. "Come on. Let's go home." Selene couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The edges of her vision started to go dark. Then Kyle Min stood up. The movement was unhurried, controlled. But the atmosphere inside the train carriage shifted instantly. The construction worker grabbed his bag and moved to the far end of the car. The woman in scrubs woke up and immediately looked away. Even Damien's smile faltered slightly as he registered the man now standing between him and Selene. Kyle Min was taller than Damien, broader, and he radiated a kind of cold, precise danger that made Damien's angry, drunk volatility look like a child throwing a tantrum. "Step back," Kyle said quietly. Damien's smile returned, but it looked forced now, brittle. This doesn't concern you, friend. That's my girlfriend. We had a fight. You know how it is. No, Kael said. I don't. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Selene watched from her seat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd never seen anyone stand up to Damien before. Nobody challenged him. Nobody got between him and what he wanted. Damien's expression darkened. Get out of my way. Kael Min didn't move. You walk through this door, and she walks out there alone. Then he will bury what's left of you. The words were directed at Selene, but Kael's eyes never left Damien's face. Damien laughed, sharp, ugly. You think you're saving her? You think she's worth saving? He leaned forward, his voice rising. She's nothing. Nobody. A worthless little ghost who doesn't exist on any paperwork. I could make her disappear tomorrow and nobody would even notice she was gone. Each word was designed to cut. Selene had heard them all before, repeated so many times they'd become background noise in her head. But hearing Damien say them in front of someone else made something crack inside her chest. Kael Min tilted his head slightly, studying Damien the way someone might study an insect. You talk too much. Then he stepped forward. It wasn't a threatening movement. Kael didn't raise his voice or clench his fists or make any aggressive gestures. He simply moved forward with absolute certainty, and somehow that was more terrifying than any display of violence could have been. Damien stumbled backward. Who the fuck do you think you are? Kael Min stopped in the edge of the train door, standing in the threshold. The dragon tattoos on his throat seemed to move in the flickering station lights. She is standing beside me now, he said softly. That means she is untouchable. The weight behind those words made the air feel heavy. Damien's face flushed red. You don't know who you're fucking with. Yes, Kael said. I do. For a long moment, nothing happened. Damien stood on the platform, fists clenched, rage pouring off him in waves. Kael Min stood in the doorway, perfectly still, radiating a kind of controlled lethality that made it clear exactly how this confrontation would end if it continued. The train's departure warning chimed. Damien took one step backward, then another. His eyes found Selene's through the window, and the look he gave her was pure venom. This isn't over. Yes, Kael Min said. It is. The doors slid shut. The train lurched forward. Damien's face disappeared into the darkness as they pulled away from the station. Selene's entire body started shaking, not from cold, not from pain, from the sudden absence of the terror that had been choking her for the last hour. She pressed her hands against her face and tried to remember how to breathe. Kael Min sat back down beside her. He didn't ask if she was okay, didn't offer hollow reassurances. He simply existed in the space next to her, solid and real, while she fell apart as quietly as possible. He'll come back, Selene finally whispered. He always comes back. I know, Kael said. You don't understand. He won't stop. He'll... I know, Kael repeated. His voice was still calm, but something in it made Selene look up. He was watching her with that same calculating gaze, as if he was solving an equation in real time. But he won't touch you again. You can't promise that. I don't make promises I can't keep. The certainty in his voice should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like a simple statement of fact, like gravity, like the sun rising in the east. The train carried them deeper into the city, away from the transfer station and Damien's rage. Selene stared at her hands. They were still trembling. She couldn't make them stop. Why did you help me? She asked. Kael Min was quiet for a moment. Because you were trying to save yourself, he finally said. That matters. I'm not worth saving. That's not your assessment to make. Selene didn't know what to say to that. Damien had spent 5 years convincing her that she was worthless, forgettable, nothing without him. The words had been repeated so often they'd become truth in her head. But this stranger with dragon tattoos and expensive suits was treating her like she mattered. It felt dangerous to believe him. The train stopped at another station. Kael Min stood. This is my stop. Selene's panic spiked immediately. Wait. He looked down at her, and for the first time something almost gentle crossed his expression. You can come with me, or you can stay on this train and hope he doesn't find you at the next station. He paused. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice, Selene knew that. Damien would be tracking her by now, calling every contact he had, checking every camera feed he could access. The subway system wouldn't hide her for long, but going with a stranger felt like jumping from one cage into another. Kael Min seemed to read her hesitation. "I'm not him," he said quietly. "I don't take what isn't freely given." The doors started to close. Selene stood up and followed him onto the platform. The station was cleaner than the one where she'd boarded. Newer tiles, better lighting, security cameras positioned at every corner. Kael Min walked toward the exit with that same unhurried certainty, and Selene hurried to keep up, her wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor. A black car waited outside. Not a taxi, a private vehicle with tinted windows and a driver who nodded at Kael Min without asking questions. Kael opened the back door and waited. Selene hesitated at the edge of the sidewalk, rain still pouring down around them. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now." Selene looked back at the subway entrance. She could run, disappear into the rain and the darkness, take her chances alone the way she'd been planning to all night. But Damien's face flashed through her mind. That smile, that certainty that she belonged to him. She got into the car. Kael Min slid in beside her and the driver pulled away from the curb without a word. The interior was warm, dry. The leather seats were soft enough that Selena's exhausted body sank into them like a bed. She watched the city blur past through rain-streaked windows, too tired to process where they were going. They drove for 20 minutes in silence. Kael Min made a single phone call, speaking in rapid Korean to someone on the other end. Selene caught fragments, medical, secure, discreet, but couldn't piece together the full conversation. When he ended the call, he glanced at her. "You need a doctor." "I'm fine." "You're still bleeding." Selene looked down. He was right. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage she'd wrapped around her forearm. She'd almost forgotten about the cut. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and pain was starting to filter through the fog. "It's not that bad," she said. "You'll let a doctor decide that." It wasn't a request. The car pulled up to a building that looked like it had been constructed from pure black glass. Obsidian towers stretched toward the sky, catching the city lights and reflecting them back in fractured patterns. A doorman appeared with an umbrella before Kael Min even opened his door. They rode an elevator up past the first 40 floors without stopping. Selene watched the numbers climb, her stomach dropping with each passing level. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. The kind of power that existed in a completely different world from the one she'd been surviving in. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse. Selene stepped out and forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Rain streaked down the glass in rivers, turning the skyline into a watercolor painting. The space was massive. Minimalist furniture arranged with military precision, dark wood, steel accents, everything clean and sharp and controlled. But it wasn't the luxury that made Selene's heart race. It was the men. They stood at various points throughout the penthouse, dressed in dark suits, each one carrying themselves with the kind of alertness that spoke of training, military or something close to it. They didn't stare at Selene, but she felt their awareness of her like pressure against her skin. This wasn't a home. This was a fortress. Kael Min walked past them without acknowledgement, and they parted like water around a stone. He led Selene through the main room into a smaller space that looked like a medical bay. Clean white surfaces. Equipment that belonged in a hospital. A doctor, an actual doctor, based on the credentials displayed on the wall, waited with a medical kit already prepared. "Sit," Kael Min said. Selene sat. The doctor was a woman in her 50s with steady hands and kind eyes. She examined Selene's injuries with professional efficiency, cleaning wounds and applying bandages without asking unnecessary questions. The cut on her forearm required stitches. The bruises would heal on their own. The ribs were bruised, but not broken. "You're lucky," the doctor said quietly. Selene almost laughed. Lucky. She'd been beaten, terrorized, and chased through the city in the rain. If this was luck, she didn't want to know what bad fortune looked like. When the doctor finished, Kael Min appeared in the doorway. "Come." He led her to another room. A bedroom. Massive bed, clean sheets, a bathroom visible through an open door, everything pristine and untouched, like a hotel room that had never been used. Sleep, Kaelmin said. We'll talk tomorrow. Wait, Selene's voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Kaelmin paused in the doorway, his back to her. For a long moment he didn't answer, then, because I've seen what happens to people who have nowhere to go, and I decided a long time ago that I wouldn't walk past it anymore. He left before Selene could respond. She stood alone in the bedroom, dripping rainwater onto expensive carpet, and tried to understand what had just happened. Hours ago, she'd been trapped in Damien's apartment, convinced she would die there. Now she was standing in a penthouse above the city, bandaged and safe and completely lost. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. The city sprawled below her in a grid of lights and shadows. Somewhere down there, Damien was looking for her. Somewhere down there, the life she'd escaped was still waiting to drag her back. But up here, wrapped in silence and security, Selene allowed herself to wonder something she hadn't dared to consider in 5 years. What if she didn't have to go back? What if this stranger with dragon tattoos and impossibly calm eyes actually meant what he said? What if she could be untouchable? The thought terrified her more than Damien's fists ever had. Because hope was dangerous. Hope could break you worse than any beating. Selene turned away from the window and collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed, too exhausted to do anything else. She stared at the ceiling and waited for sleep to come, but her mind kept replaying the moment on the subway platform when Kaelmin stepped between her and Damien. The moment someone finally stood up for her. The moment everything changed. Rain continued to hammer against the windows as exhaustion finally pulled her under. Her last conscious thought was of Kaelmin's voice, quiet and certain in the darkness. She stands beside me now. And for the first time in 5 years, Selene Vale fell asleep without checking if the door was locked. Selene woke to silence. Not the kind of silence she'd grown used to in Damien's apartment. The tense, breathless quiet that came before his footsteps in the hallway, before his hand on the doorknob, before everything went wrong again. This silence felt different. Clean. Almost peaceful. She opened her eyes to unfamiliar white ceiling panels and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a gray morning sky. For 3 disoriented seconds, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memories crashed back. The subway. Damien's smile. The stranger with dragon tattoos who'd stepped between them like a wall made of bone and controlled violence. Kaelmin. Selene sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. The bruises had settled overnight into deep purples and blacks across her ribs. Her forearm throbbed where the doctor had stitched the gash closed. But she was clean. Someone had left fresh clothes folded on the chair beside the bed, soft gray sweatpants and a black long-sleeve shirt that looked expensive in a way she couldn't quite define. She looked down at herself, still wearing yesterday's blood-stained clothes, still smelling like rain and copper and fear. The bathroom was larger than Damien's entire bedroom had been. Marble floors, heated towel racks, a shower with more settings than she knew what to do with. Selene stood under scalding water for 20 minutes, scrubbing her skin until it turned pink, watching rust-colored water circle the drain. She kept expecting someone to bang on the door, to tell her she'd used too much hot water, to remind her that nothing here belonged to her. Nobody came. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that felt like clouds, she found the bedroom door slightly ajar. Voices drifted from somewhere in the penthouse, low, conversational, speaking Korean too rapidly for her to catch individual words, even if she'd understood the language. Selene dressed in those clothes that had been left for her. They fit perfectly. That bothered her more than it should have. Someone had looked at her last night, bleeding, soaked, barely conscious, and accurately guessed her size. Someone had paid attention to details she'd spent 5 years trying to hide. She opened the bedroom door fully and stepped into the main living space. 3 men stood near the windows, examining something on a tablet. All wore dark suits. All carried themselves with that same military precision she'd noticed last night. They glanced up when she entered, their expressions neutral, then immediately looked away. Not dismissive, respectful, like they'd been specifically instructed not to stare. Kaelmin sat at a glass dining table near the kitchen, reading something on his phone with the same focused intensity he seemed to bring to everything. He'd changed clothes since last night. Charcoal suit today. White shirt. No tie. The dragon tattoos were barely visible above his collar, just hints of black ink against skin. He looked up when Celine's footsteps crossed from carpet to hardwood. "Sit," he said. Not a command, not a request. Something in between. Celine's legs carried her to the table before her brain caught up. She sat across from him, hyper-aware of the armed men in the room, the city sprawling 40 floors below, the absolute foreignness of everything around her. A woman appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray. Older, Korean. She set down plates of food without speaking. Rice, soup, banchan arranged in small dishes, then disappeared as silently as she'd come. Selene stared at the food, her stomach twisted. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten in how long?" She didn't answer. "Eat," Kael-min said. Not unkindly, but with the same certainty that had stopped Damien cold on the subway platform. Like reality simply bent around his expectations. Selene picked up the spoon. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted soup to her mouth. It tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. Damien had controlled her food intake like everything else, keeping her weak, keeping her dependent, making sure she never had enough energy to think about leaving. She ate 3 bites before her throat closed up. "I should go." Kael-min set down his phone. "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere. Anywhere. He's looking for you." The words landed like stones in still water. Selene's appetite vanished completely. "How do you know?" "Because I would be." Kael-min studied her with that unreadable expression. "He spent 5 years building a cage around you. Men like that don't accept losing control. You don't know him." "I know his type." Something in the way Kael said it made Selene look up. His face remained neutral, but his eyes held shadows that suggested he'd met men like Damien before. Maybe stopped them. Maybe buried them. She couldn't tell which possibility scared her more. "I can't stay here," Selene said. "Why not?" "Because I don't know you. Because this—" She gestured at the penthouse, the city view, the armed men pretending not to listen. "This isn't real. People don't just save strangers on subway trains." "I did." "Why?" Kael-min was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it down with precise care. "Because I built an empire by recognizing when something valuable is being wasted," he finally said. "And you were wasting yourself staying invisible." The words hit harder than Selene expected. "You don't know anything about me. I know you fought back last night. I know you ran instead of staying. I know you were bleeding and terrified and still managed to get yourself onto that train." His eyes locked onto hers. "That's not nothing." Selene's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was exactly what Damien had always said. Worthless, forgettable, nobody who mattered. But the words stuck in her throat because some small, dangerous part of her wanted to believe Kael-min instead. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing. Everyone wants something." "Then I want you to stay alive long enough to figure out what you want." Kael-min stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "That's all." He started to walk away. Selene's voice stopped him. "Who are you?" Kael turned back, and for the first time something almost resembling amusement crossed his features. "Someone who makes problems disappear." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer that matters right now." He left before she could press further. The 3 men by the window followed him, moving like a synchronized unit. Selene heard the elevator ding, heard doors slide shut, heard the mechanical hum as the car descended. Then silence returned. She sat alone at the glass table, surrounded by untouched food and floor-to-ceiling windows that made her feel exposed despite being 40 stories above the street. This penthouse was beautiful, secure. Everything she'd dreamed about when she was locked in Damien's apartment with bruises blooming under her clothes. But it was still a cage, just a prettier one. Selene stood and walked to the windows. The city stretched endlessly below her. Gray buildings, wet streets, people moving like ants through the morning rush. Somewhere down there, Damien was searching. She could feel it in her bones. He wouldn't stop. He never stopped. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Clean now. Bandaged, wearing clothes that actually fit, but still hollow-eyed, still broken in ways that couldn't be fixed with hot showers and expensive fabric. The elevator dinged again. Selene spun around, heart hammering. But it wasn't Kael-min returning. A young woman stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio. Mid-20s, Korean, dressed in crisp business attire. She smiled at Selene with the kind of professional warmth that felt rehearsed, but not insincere. "Miss Vale," she said, "I'm Min Ji. Mr. Min asked me to provide you with some essentials." Essentials? Minji set the portfolio on the dining table and opened it. Inside were documents, identification papers, bank cards, a phone still in its box. "Clothing will arrive this afternoon. The phone is secure, encrypted, untraceable. The account has enough funds for immediate needs. Mr. Min wanted you to have options." Selene stared at the spread of papers like they might explode. "I can't accept this. Mr. Min anticipated you would say that." Minji's smile didn't waver. "He asked me to remind you that having resources isn't the same as being owned. You can leave whenever you want. The money, the phone, the documents, they're yours regardless." "Why would he do this?" "You'd have to ask him." But Kael Min was already gone, and Selene was left standing in his fortress trying to understand why a stranger would hand her the tools to disappear. Minji spent the next hour explaining everything. The bank account held $50,000. The phone had 3 contacts programmed: Kael Min's direct line, building security, and an emergency number that Minji promised would bring help within minutes, regardless of location. The identification papers looked legitimate enough that Selene couldn't spot any flaws. "How did he get these so fast?" Selene asked, holding up what appeared to be a state-issued ID with her photo on it. Minji's professional smile never cracked. "Mr. Min has resources." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." The echo of Kael Min's earlier words made Selene's skin prickle. Everyone in this place spoke in half-truths and careful evasions, like they'd all been trained to reveal nothing that mattered. After Minji left, Selene stood in the middle of the penthouse holding a phone that represented more freedom than she'd had in 5 years. She could call someone, leave, disappear into the city with enough money to start over somewhere Damien would never find her. But she couldn't make her fingers move toward the door, because leaving meant going back to being invisible. And something in her was tired of disappearing. The afternoon brought clothes, expensive, well-fitted, in colors Selene hadn't worn since before Damien convinced her that bright colors drew dangerous attention. She stared at a deep blue sweater like it was a foreign object. Damien had only allowed her to wear grays and browns and blacks, camouflage colors, forgettable shades. This blue looked like the ocean before a storm. She put it on. The woman in the mirror looked different, still bruised, still hollow around the eyes, but the color brought something back to her face that had been missing, something alive. Selene was still staring at her reflection when the elevator opened again and Kael Min returned. He paused when he saw her, his eyes tracking from the blue sweater to her face with an expression she couldn't read. "Better," he said. Just that. Nothing more. But the single word made Selene's chest tighten in a way that felt dangerous. "I need to understand something," she said. "You give me money, documents, everything I need to leave, but you also keep me in a building surrounded by armed men. Which is it? Am I a guest or a prisoner?" Kael Min crossed to the windows, hands in his pockets. "You're someone who needs time to heal before making decisions. That's not your choice to make." "No," he agreed. "It's not, which is why the elevator works for you now. Security has been told to let you come and go as you please. You want to leave? You leave." He said it so casually, like it was obvious, like Selene should have known all along that she wasn't trapped. "Then why do you have armed men everywhere?" she asked. "Because your ex-boyfriend isn't the only dangerous person in this city." Kael turned to face her. "And because the moment you stepped off that subway with me, you became associated with me. That has consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind that require security." Still speaking in riddles, still revealing nothing concrete. Selene's frustration bubbled over. "Who the hell are you, really?" Kael Min studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped something, and held it out. The screen showed a news article. The headline read, "Korean business magnate Kael Min expands holdings in city development projects." Below it was a photo of Kael Min at some gala event, shaking hands with people in expensive suits, looking every inch the successful entrepreneur. "Real estate developer?" Selene said. "Among other things." "What other things?" Kael took the phone back. "Things that keep this city running, When the people who are supposed to keep it running fail. The careful phrasing told Selene everything she needed to know. This man wasn't just wealthy, he operated in spaces where official power and unofficial control blurred together, where money and influence mixed with something darker. "Your mob," she said. Kale's expression didn't change. "I prefer the term alternative infrastructure provider, E." Despite everything, Selene almost laughed. The absurdity of it hit her all at once. She'd escaped one monster and landed in the protection of someone who probably terrified monsters professionally. "I should be scared of you," she said. "Probably. But I'm not." "I know." Kaelmin's eyes held hers. "That's what makes you interesting." The word hung in the air between them. Interesting. Not valuable, not useful. Interesting, like Selene was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "I don't understand any of this," Selene admitted. "Why you helped me, why you're still helping me, what you think is going to happen." "I don't think anything is going to happen," Kael said. "I'm creating space for you to decide what happens next. That's all." "And if Damien comes here?" Something shifted in Kaelmin's expression. The polite neutrality disappeared, replaced by something cold and absolute. "Then he learns what happens to men who touch things that don't belong to them." The possessiveness in the statement should have terrified Selene. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Safe. The realization scared her more than anything else. Days blurred together. Selene existed in the penthouse like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She watched the city through windows, ate food prepared by the silent cook, avoided the armed men who moved through the space like shadows. Kaelmin came and went on a schedule she couldn't predict. Sometimes he'd be gone for days, sometimes he'd appear in the evening, sitting at the glass table with paperwork and coffee, working in silence while Selene pretended to read books from his extensive library. They didn't talk much, but his presence was steady, reliable. He never asked her personal questions, never pressed her about Damien or her past or what she wanted for her future. He simply existed in the same space, giving her room to breathe without demanding anything in return. It was the strangest kindness Selene had ever experienced. One evening, a week after she'd arrived, Kael found her standing at the windows watching the sunset paint the sky in violent oranges and reds. "You're thinking too much," he said. Selene didn't turn around. "How do you know?" "You get this look, like you're solving an equation that doesn't have an answer." "Maybe I am." Kael moved to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, staring out at the same view. "What's the equation?" "Figuring out when the other shoe drops." "What makes you think it will?" "Because it always does." Selene's voice came out harder than she intended. "People don't help for free. There's always a price, always something they want." "And what do you think I want?" The question hung between them. Selene finally turned to look at him. In the dying light, his features looked carved from shadow and sharp edges. The dragon tattoos on his throat seemed to move with each breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's what scares me." Kaelmin was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want you to stop looking at yourself like you're already dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Selene's breath caught. "You move through this space like you're apologizing for existing," Kael continued. "Like you think if you're quiet enough and small enough, maybe nobody will notice you're here. But you are here, and you're allowed to take up space." "I don't know how." "Then learn." He said it like it was simple. Like 5 years of conditioning could be erased with a decision. Like she could just choose to be different and make it true. "I wouldn't know where to start," Selene said. Kaelmin turned to face her fully. "Start by looking me in the eye when we talk." Selene realized she'd been staring at the floor. She forced herself to lift her gaze. Meeting his eyes felt like touching a live wire. Dangerous, electric, impossible to hold for long. But she held it. "Better," Kael said softly. That night, Selene dreamed of Damien for the first time since arriving at the penthouse. In the dream, he was standing in the elevator when the doors opened, smiling, reaching for her, promising he'd forgive everything if she just came home. She woke up gasping, sweat-soaked and shaking. The bedroom door opened. Kaelmin appeared in the doorway, wearing sweatpants and nothing else, clearly pulled from sleep by whatever sound she'd made. The dragon tattoos covered more of his torso than she'd realized. intricate designs that wrapped around his ribs and across his shoulders like armor. "You screamed," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not." He didn't come closer, didn't invade her space, just stood in the doorway like a wall between her and whatever nightmares lived inside her head.
"He was here," Selena whispered. "In my dream. He found me." "He won't." "You can't know that." "Yes," Kael said, "I can." The certainty in his voice should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like a promise carved in stone. "Go back to sleep," Kael said. "I'll be in the next room."
He left the door slightly open when he went. Selene lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of him settling into the chair just outside her bedroom, standing guard, keeping watch over someone he had no obligation to protect. And for the first time, Selene wondered if maybe Kael Min was telling the truth. Maybe he really didn't want anything from her. Maybe he just wanted her to survive. The thought was more terrifying than any nightmare. 2 weeks after Selene arrived, Kael Min took her down to the lowest level of the building, not the lobby. Below that, a private gym carved out of concrete and steel. "What are we doing here?" Selene asked. Kael walked to the center of the mat. "Teaching you how to stand your ground." "I don't know how to fight." "I'm not teaching you to fight. I'm teaching you to not collapse the first time someone comes at you." He gestured to the space in front of him. "Stand here." Selene moved onto the mat, her heart hammered. "Push me," Kael said. "What?" "Push me. As hard as you can." Selene stared at him. "That's stupid." "Do it anyway." She placed her hands against his chest and shoved. Kael didn't move, didn't even sway. He stood like a mountain, while Selene's strength broke against him like water against stone. "Harder," he said. "I am pushing hard." "No, you're apologizing while you push. Try again." Selene shoved again. Still nothing. Frustration built in her chest. "You're still holding back," Kael said. "Like you're afraid of hurting me." "You're twice my size." "So was Damien. Did that stop him from hitting you?" The words detonated something inside Selene's chest. Rage flooded through her, hot, vicious, years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. She slammed her hands against Kael's chest with everything she had. He moved backward half a step. "Better," Kael said. Again. They spent an hour like that. Kael teaching Selene how to plant her feet, how to use her body weight, how to channel anger into something physical instead of swallowing it down where it turned toxic. He didn't coddle her, didn't make it easy. When she fell, he told her to get up. When she wanted to quit, he told her to try harder. And slowly, something shifted. Selene stopped apologizing for the space she took up, stopped pulling her punches, started hitting like she meant it. By the end of the session, sweat soaked through her clothes and her muscles screamed, but she felt more alive than she had in years. "You're stronger than you think," Kael said, tossing her a water bottle. Selene caught it. "I'm really not." "You survived 5 years with a man who wanted you dead inside. You're still breathing. That's strength." The compliment landed harder than any of the training. Selene unscrewed the bottle cap with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this?" "Because watching you shrink every time someone raises their voice is unbearable. You barely know me." "I know enough." Kael Min started wrapping up the training mats, his movements efficient and practiced. Selene watched him work, trying to reconcile the man who commanded armed security forces with the one who'd just spent an hour teaching her how to stand without flinching. "Can I ask you something?" Selene said. "You can ask." "The tattoos, what do they mean?" Kael paused. For a moment, Selene thought he wouldn't answer. Then he straightened, his fingers unconsciously touching the dragons on his throat. "They're a reminder." "Of what?" "That I used to be someone who needed reminding not to become a monster." His eyes met hers. "Some days I still do." The honesty in the statement stole Selene's breath. This man who seemed carved from granite and controlled violence was admitting to his own darkness, his own struggle. "And do you?" Selene asked. "Become a monster?" "Sometimes." Kael's voice was flat, matter of fact. "When necessary." "That doesn't scare you?" "No. What scares me is the idea that I might start enjoying it." They stood in the concrete gym, surrounded by weapons and training equipment, and Selene realized something crucial. Kael Min wasn't saving her because he was good. He was creating space for her to save herself because he understood what it meant to fight your own nature every single day. "Thank you," Selene said quietly. "For what?" "For not pretending to be something you're not." Kael almost smiled. "Come on, let's get food." They rode the elevator back up in comfortable silence. When the doors opened onto the penthouse, 3 of Kael's men were waiting with grim expressions. The atmosphere changed instantly. "What happened?" Kael asked. The tallest one, a man Selene had learned was named Jin, stepped forward. "We have a situation." He held out a tablet. The screen showed security camera footage from the building's lobby, timestamped from 20 minutes ago. The image showed Damien Cross talking to the front desk security guard. Selene's blood turned to ice. "He's been asking questions," Jin said, "showing your photo, claiming you're his wife and you're having a mental health crisis." "What did security tell him?" Kael's voice was perfectly calm, but something lethal had entered his expression. "Nothing. They followed protocol, but he's not leaving. He's been in the lobby for the past 15 minutes, watching the elevators." Selene's hand started shaking. "He found me." "No," Kael said. "He found the building. That's not the same thing." "He'll come back. He'll keep coming back until I make him understand that's not an option." Kael handed the tablet back to Jin. "Double security on all entry points. Nobody comes up without facial recognition clearance. And get me everything you can find on Damien Cross. Employment, associates, where he's living, everything." Jean nodded and disappeared into the elevator with the other men. Selene stood frozen in the middle of the penthouse, feeling her carefully constructed sense of safety crumbling. This was always going to happen. "Yes," Kael agreed. "But now we're prepared for it." "You don't understand. Damien doesn't give up. He'll find a way." "So will I." Kael Min turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made Selene's protests die in her throat. "I told you on that subway platform that you were untouchable. I meant it. If he wants to test that statement, he's welcome to try." "And then what? You'll what? Kill him?" "If necessary." The casual way Kael said it made Selene's stomach drop. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Kael closed the distance between them. "That man spent 5 years breaking you down piece by piece. He doesn't get to keep doing it just because he's persistent. This isn't your fight." "You made it my fight when you got in my car instead of running." Kael's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "I don't do things halfway, Selene. If I'm protecting you, I'm protecting you. That means dealing with threats before they become problems." Selene wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she could handle Damien herself, that she didn't need a man with dragon tattoos and a private army fighting her battles. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She did need help, and Kael Min was offering it without demanding anything in return. "I don't want you to become a monster because of me," Selene whispered. Something almost soft crossed Kael's expression. "Too late. I became a monster years ago. The best I can do now is point that monstrosity at people who deserve it." He left her standing in the middle of the penthouse while he made phone calls in rapid Korean. Selene sank onto the couch, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something else she couldn't name. Damien had found the building, which meant the fragile peace she'd been building was over, which meant war was coming whether she was ready for it or not. That night, Selene couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, mind racing through every possible scenario. Damien breaking through security, Damien waiting in the lobby, Damien finding her somewhere outside the building where Kael's protection couldn't reach. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and walked into the main living space. Kael Min sat at the glass table in the darkness, lit only by the glow of his laptop screen. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black shirt, combat clothes, preparation for violence. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "No." "Come here." Selene crossed to the table and sat down across from him. The laptop screen showed profiles, police reports, employment records, financial statements. Everything about Damien Cross laid out in digital detail. "He works security at a shipping warehouse," Kael said, still scrolling. "Has for 6 years. No major criminal record. A few domestic disturbance calls that never resulted in charges." His jaw tightened, because the women never pressed charges. "They were probably too scared," Selene said quietly. I know. Kael closed the laptop. But that ends now. What are you going to do? Make him an offer. What kind of offer? Kael's eyes met hers in the darkness. The kind where he leaves the city and never comes back. Or doesn't leave and deals with the consequences. And if he chooses consequences, then I make sure he regrets it. The cold certainty in Kael's voice should have horrified Selene. Instead, it made her feel something she'd spent 5 years believing didn't exist. Power. Not her own power. Not yet. But the power of having someone in her corner who wouldn't back down. Who wouldn't negotiate. Who would look Damien Cross in the eye and tell him his reign of terror was over. When? Selene asked. Tomorrow. Kael stood. I'm meeting him at the warehouse, making my position clear. I want to come. No. It's my fight. Which is exactly why you're staying here. Kael's tone left no room for argument. He doesn't get to see you scared. He doesn't get to see you at all. The only person he sees tomorrow is me, and the only message he gets is that you're not his anymore. Selene wanted to protest, wanted to demand the right to face Damien herself. But Kael was right. Seeing Damien again would break something inside her that was only just starting to heal. Promise me you won't kill him, Selene said. Kael Min was quiet for a long moment. I promise I won't kill him unless he makes me. It wasn't the promise she wanted, but it was the only one Kael was willing to give. The next day moved with agonizing slowness. Kael left before dawn with 3 of his men. Selene paced the penthouse like a caged animal, counting minutes, watching the city wake up 40 floors below. Hours passed. No word, no updates, just silence. Then, around noon, her new phone buzzed. A text from Kael. It's handled. 2 words. Nothing more. Selene stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Handled. What did that mean? Was Damien gone? Was he dead? Was this really over? The elevator dinged. Kael Min stepped out, alone this time, his suit jacket missing and his shirt sleeves rolled up. There was blood on his knuckles. Not much. Just enough to tell a story. What happened? Selene demanded. We had a conversation. Kael walked past her toward the bathroom. He's leaving the city, tonight. I made sure he understood that coming back would be unwise. What kind of conversation draws blood? Kael turned on the sink, washing red from his hands. The productive kind. Selene followed him into the bathroom. Did you hurt him? Yes. How badly? Badly enough that he'll remember this conversation every time he looks in a mirror. Kael dried his hands, his expression neutral. Not badly enough that he can't travel. You promised you wouldn't kill him. And I kept that promise. Kael turned to face her. But I never promised I wouldn't make him understand exactly what would happen if he came near you again. Selene should have been horrified, should have been disgusted by the violence. But all she felt was relief so profound it made her knees weak. Is it really over? She whispered. Yes. How do you know he won't come back? Because I showed him what I'm capable of when someone threatens something I'm protecting. Kael's eyes held hers. And because I have people watching him. If he so much as looks at a map of this city, I'll know. The certainty in his voice made Selene believe him. Kael Min wasn't making empty threats. He was stating facts. Damien was gone. The monster who'd owned her fear for 5 years was finally, truly gone. Selene's chest tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. But she did. She had to say something, because Kael Min had just done what she'd been too terrified to do herself. He'd looked her abuser in the eye and made him disappear. Thank you, Selene managed. Kael nodded once. You're safe now. That's all that matters. He started to walk past her, but Selene's hand shot out, catching his wrist. The contact stopped them both. Kael's skin was warm under her fingers. Solid, real. Why? Selene asked. Why would you do all this for someone you barely know? Kael Min looked down at where her hand gripped his wrist. Then his eyes lifted to meet hers. Because you remind me of someone. Who? Myself, 10 years ago, before I learned that surviving meant fighting back. The admission hung between them, raw, honest, more vulnerable than anything Kael had shared before. Did you have someone help you? Selene asked quietly.
No. Kale's voice was flat. I had to figure it out alone, and it cost me things I can't get back. He gently pulled his wrist free from her grip. I decided a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to be for someone else what I needed back then, I would take it. Even if it means violence? Especially then.
Selene studied his face, seeing past the dragon tattoos and expensive clothes to the man underneath. Someone who'd clawed his way out of hell and built an empire from the ashes. Someone who understood exactly what she'd survived because he'd survived it too. I don't know how to move forward from here, she admitted. That's fine. You don't need to know yet. Kale stepped back, creating distance between them. Rest today. Tomorrow we start building something new. Building what?
Whatever you want. He paused in the doorway. You're not invisible anymore, Selene. Time to figure out who you are when people can actually see you. Then he was gone, leaving Selene standing alone in the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in 5 years, the woman staring back didn't look like a ghost. She looked like someone who might survive after all. But that night, everything changed. Selene woke to the sound of alarms screaming through the penthouse. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls. Her bedroom door flew open and one of Kael's men, Jin, stood in the doorway, weapon drawn. Get up, he barked. Now! Selene scrambled out of bed, her heart hammering. What's happening? Building breach. Lower floors. Jin grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the elevator. We're moving you to the safe room. Where's Kael? Dealing with the situation. They ran through the penthouse. More armed men moved through the space with military precision, taking positions near windows and entry points. The elevator doors opened. Jin shoved Selene inside and hit a button that wasn't visible on the normal panel. The elevator descended rapidly. Selene's stomach dropped. Who breached the building? Jin's expression was grim. Your ex-boyfriend. And he brought friends. The world tilted. That's impossible, Kael said. Kael underestimated how stupid Damien Cross is. The elevator stopped. Jin pulled Selene out into a concrete corridor that looked like it belonged in a bunker. He partnered with the Yong Syndicate. They're hitting us on 5 floors simultaneously. The what? Rival organization. They've been trying to move into Kael's territory for months. Jin pushed open a reinforced steel door. Congratulations. You just became the excuse they needed for war. He shoved Selene into a small concrete room lined with monitors showing security footage from throughout the building. Then he locked the door from the outside, leaving her alone. On the screens, Selene watched armed men flooding through the lower levels of the building, watched Kael's security forces engaging them, watched muzzle flashes and bodies falling and chaos erupting throughout the fortress she'd thought was impenetrable. And on one screen, clear as day, she saw Damien Cross walking through the lobby, surrounded by men with automatic rifles, smiling, like he'd already won. Selene's hand shook as she realized the truth. This wasn't over. This was just beginning, and she'd just dragged Kael Min into a war he might not survive. The concrete walls of the safe room pressed in on Selene like a tomb. She stood inches from the monitors, watching her worst nightmare unfold in real time across a dozen flickering screens. Damien moved through the building's lobby with the confidence of a man who'd already won, flanked by armed soldiers wearing tactical gear that looked military grade. Too professional. Too organized. This wasn't desperation. This was a planned assault. Gunfire crackled through the speakers. On screen 4, 2 of Kael's men took cover behind marble pillars as bullets chewed through the expensive stonework. On screen 7, the elevator banks were completely overtaken, hostile forces controlling every route up. On screen 2, more armed men poured through a service entrance that should have been locked down tighter than a bank vault. Someone had given them access. Someone had told them exactly where to hit and when. Selene's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her hands pressed against the monitor, showing Damien's smiling face, fingers leaving prints on the glass. 5 hours ago, Kael had promised her this was over. 5 hours ago, she'd believed him. She'd been a fool. The steel door behind her unlocked with a metallic clunk. Selene spun around, expecting Jin or another of Kael's security team. Kael Min stepped through the doorway. Blood spattered his white shirt in dark constellations. His knuckles were split open, raw and bleeding. A
A cut above his left eyebrow dripped red down the side of his face, but his eyes were clear, focused, absolutely calm despite the chaos erupting throughout his fortress. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Selene shook her head, unable to form words. Kale crossed to the monitors, his gaze sweeping across the screens with tactical precision. His jaw tightened as he absorbed the situation. 9 hostile entry points, coordinated timing, professional execution. This wasn't random violence. This was surgical. "How many?" Kale asked into the radio clipped to his belt. Static crackled. Then Jin's voice, tight with strain. 30+ hostiles. Maybe more. They're hitting the parking garage, service entrances, and the south stairwell simultaneously. We're holding the penthouse level, but barely. Casualties? A pause. 3 of ours down. 1 critical. Kale's expression didn't change, but something lethal flickered behind his eyes. "Fall back to defensive positions. Seal the upper floors. Nobody gets above 35. "Copy that." Kale lowered the radio and turned to Selene. "We need to move you." "Move me where?" "They're everywhere." Selene's voice came out higher than she intended, panic bleeding through every syllable. "You said this was over. You said Damien was leaving the city." "I was wrong." The admission landed like a slap. Kael Min, the man who commanded rooms with absolute certainty, who'd promised her safety like it was a law of physics, was admitting he'd miscalculated. "How did he do this?" Selene demanded. "How did he get past your security? How did he get an army?" "The Young Syndicate." Kael pulled up camera footage on one of the monitors, zooming in on tactical gear marked with a subtle insignia. "Korean organized crime. They've been trying to push into my territory for the last year. Damien gave them an excuse to move." "What kind of excuse?" Kale's eyes met hers. "You." The word detonated in Selene's chest. "What?" "He told them I kidnapped an American woman, that I'm holding you prisoner up here, that I'm using you as leverage against someone." Kale's voice remained flat, clinical. "It's a lie. But it gave them justification to attack without starting an all-out war with the other families." Selene's knees went weak. "This is my fault." "No. This is Damien's fault. And the Young Syndicate's opportunism." Kael grabbed her arm, steadying her. "But right now, fault doesn't matter. Survival does." An explosion rocked the building. The monitors flickered. Dust rained from the concrete ceiling. "Charges on the stairwell doors," Kael said, reading the security alerts streaming across the bottom of the screens. "They're blowing their way up, floor by floor." "How long until they reach us?" 10 minutes. Maybe less." Selene's vision tunneled. 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes before Damien dragged her back into captivity. Before everything Kael had built for her, the safety, the space to heal, the possibility of something better, was ripped away. "There has to be another way out," Selene said. "There is." Kael pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "Helicopter on the roof. But we need to get you there first, and the route up is compromised." "Then what do we do?" Kael looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made in real time. "We go through them." "That's insane." "Yes." Kael checked his weapon, a matte black pistol that looked like it had seen extensive use. "But it's the only option that keeps you out of his hands." The steel door burst open. Jin stumbled through, his shoulder bleeding through his jacket. Behind him came 2 more of Kael's men, both armed, both looking like they'd just survived a war zone. "South stairwell's gone," Jin gasped. "They're on 28 and climbing fast. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach the penthouse level." Kael's expression remained absolutely neutral. "How many can you spare for escort?" Jin's eyes flicked to Selene, then back to Kael. "Boss, if we pull anyone else from defensive positions, we lose containment." "I didn't ask for analysis. I asked how many." 2, maximum." Jin straightened despite the blood soaking through his shirt. "The rest need to hold the line, or we lose everything." "Then 2 will have to be enough." Kael turned to Selene. "Stay between us. Don't stop moving. Don't look back. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" Selene nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They moved out of the safe room into the concrete corridor. The emergency lights cast everything in hellish red. Somewhere above them, gunfire echoed through the building's bones, sharp cracks followed by the duller thuds of return fire. Kael led the way with his weapon raised, movements efficient and practiced. This wasn't his first firefight. probably not even his 50th. Jin and the other two men formed a protective triangle around Selene, their rifles tracking shadows as they moved through the subterranean level toward a service elevator hidden behind a maintenance panel. "This goes straight to the roof," KL explained, prying open the panel to reveal an older elevator car that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "Building inspectors don't even know it exists." They piled inside. The elevator groaned as it started climbing. Selene watched the floor numbers tick upward. 15, 16, 17. Each number felt like a countdown to disaster. At floor 29, the elevator shuddered to a stop. "No," Kyle breathed. He stabbed the button repeatedly. Nothing happened. The car hung suspended in the shaft, emergency lights flickering. Jin checked his radio. "They cut power to the secondary systems. We're dead in the water." "Emergency access?" Kyle asked. "Roof hatch," Jin pointed up at a panel in the elevator ceiling. "But we'd be climbing blind through 30 floors of shaft." Another explosion, closer this time. The elevator car swung slightly on its cables. KL made a decision. "Open it." 2 minutes later, they were climbing through darkness that smelled like grease and rust and decades of neglect. Selena's hands shook as she gripped the maintenance ladder welded to the shaft wall, each rung slick with grime. Above her, Jin's boots scraped against metal. Below her, one of Kael's men breathed hard from exertion. And below him, Kael brought up the rear, moving with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. Selene's arms burned. Her forearm, where the doctor had stitched the cut just 2 weeks ago, throbbed with each pull upward. Sweat soaked through her shirt. The darkness pressed in from all sides, broken only by faint light filtering through elevator doors every 10 feet. They climbed past floor 32, 33, 34. Then voices echoed through the shaft from below. "I see something moving up there." Gunfire erupted. Bullets pinged off metal, sparking in the darkness. Selene screamed and pressed herself against the ladder as rounds tore through the air inches from her body. "Climb!" KL roared. "Don't stop!" Selene's muscles screamed in protest, but terror gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She hauled herself up rung by rung, gasping for air, while bullets continued to spark against the shaft walls. One of Kael's men returned fire. The muzzle flashed blindingly bright in the enclosed space. The radio crackled. "Boss, we've lost the penthouse. They're inside." Kael cursed in Korean. "How many?" "At least 15. They're searching room by room." They reached floor 38. Jin pried open the elevator doors, and they tumbled out into a hallway that looked like a war zone. Bullet holes stitched across walls. Shattered glass crunched underfoot. A fire sprinkler system activated, raining water across everything. "Roof access is 2 floors up," Jin said, checking his weapon. "But they'll have it covered by now." "Then we go around." Kael grabbed Selene's hand, his grip solid and unyielding. "Stay with me." They ran through the flooded hallway toward an emergency stairwell. Behind them, voices shouted in Korean. Footsteps pounded closer. The building had become a maze of hostile forces closing in from every direction. Kael kicked open the stairwell door and they charged upward, taking steps 2 at a time. 39. 40. The roof access door appeared ahead like salvation. It was locked. "Move," Kael said, and shot the lock mechanism 3 times. The door swung open, revealing a rain-soaked rooftop and the most beautiful sound Selene had ever heard. Helicopter rotors cutting through storm clouds. A sleek black aircraft sat on the helipad, rotors already spinning, a pilot visible through the cockpit glass. Safety. Escape. Freedom. They were 10 feet from the helicopter when the roof access door behind them exploded outward. Damien Cross stepped onto the rooftop, flanked by 6 men in tactical gear. Rain plastered his hair to his skull. His smile looked manic in the lightning that crackled overhead. "Going somewhere, baby?" he called over the helicopter noise. Kael's men opened fire immediately. The tactical team returned it. Bullets tore through the air. One of Kael's men went down, clutching his leg. Jin took cover behind a ventilation unit, laying down suppressing fire. Kael shoved Selene toward the helicopter. "Get in, now. Not without you. I'll be right behind you. Go!" Selene ran. Rain hammered her face. Wind from the rotors nearly knocked her over. She was 5 feet from the helicopter when someone grabbed her from behind, yanking her backward with brutal force. Damien. His arm locked around her throat, cutting off air. His other hand pressed a pistol against her temple. The metal was cold against her skin. "Nobody fucking moves!" Damien screamed. Everything stopped. Kael's men froze mid-reload. The tactical team held position. Even Kael Min went absolutely still, his weapon trained on Damien's head, but unable to fire without hitting Selene. The helicopter pilot looked at Kael, waiting for orders. Kael gave the smallest shake of his head. The rotors continued spinning, but the aircraft stayed grounded. "That's better," Damien said. His breath was hot against Selene's ear, carrying the familiar smell of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. "Drop your weapons. All of you. Or I paint this rooftop with her brain." "You won't," Kael said. His voice was perfectly calm despite the rain and gunfire and chaos. "Because if you kill her, you lose your only leverage." Damien laughed, wild and unhinged. "You think I need leverage? Look around, asshole. I brought an army. I brought people who actually know how to fight. What did you bring? 3 bleeding rent-a-cops?" "I brought a promise." Kael took one step forward. "I told her she was untouchable. I don't break promises." "Then you're about to learn a hard lesson about making promises you can't keep." Damien pressed the gun harder against Selene's temple. "She's mine. She's always been mine. You were just babysitting." Selene's vision blurred with tears and rain. She could feel Damien's heart hammering against her back, could smell the desperation and rage pouring off him. This wasn't about love. It had never been about love. This was about ownership, about a man who couldn't accept losing control. "Let her go," Kael said, "and I'll let you walk off this roof alive." "Let her go, and you'll put a bullet in my spine before I reach the door." Damien started backing toward the roof access, dragging Selene with him. "New plan. She comes with me. You stay here. Everyone lives." "No," Kael said flatly. "No!" Damien's voice rose to a shriek. "You don't get a vote. She's not yours to keep." "She's not yours either." The words hit Damien like a physical blow. His grip on Selene loosened fractionally, just for a second, just enough. Selene drove her elbow backward into Damien's ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. The move Kael had taught her in the gym. The one she'd practiced 100 times on the mats, her body weight behind it. No apology. No hesitation. Damien gasped and stumbled backward. The gun swung away from Selene's head. 3 gunshots cracked across the rooftop in rapid succession. Damien's body jerked. Blood bloomed across his chest in dark flowers. He looked down at the wounds with an expression of profound confusion, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then he collapsed. Selene stood frozen, her elbows still raised, her entire body shaking. Kael's weapon was still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "Get to the helicopter," Kael said. "Now." But Selene couldn't move. Couldn't look away from Damien's body sprawled on the wet rooftop, blood mixing with rainwater, eyes staring sightless at the storm clouds above. Dead. Damien Cross was dead. The man who'd terrorized her for 5 years was gone, and Kael Min had killed him. "Selene," Kael's voice cut through her shock. "We need to move. His friends aren't going to let this go." As if summoned by his words, the tactical team opened fire again. Bullets sparked off concrete. Jin returned fire, cursing. One of the helicopter's rotors shattered, sending shrapnel across the rooftop. "The backup chopper!" Jin yelled, pointing to a second aircraft on the far side of the roof. "Go!" They ran through hell. Bullets everywhere, bodies falling. The rooftop transformed into a battlefield that would haunt Selene's nightmares for years. She stumbled over debris. Kael's hand locked around her wrist, pulling her forward when her legs wanted to collapse. They were 20 feet from the second helicopter when someone tackled Kael from the side. A massive man in tactical gear, easily 6'5", drove Kael into the concrete with bone-crushing force. They rolled across the rooftop, trading brutal blows. Kael's gun skittered away across wet concrete. "Run!" Kael roared at Selene while blocking a punch that would have shattered his jaw. "Get on that helicopter!" But Selene couldn't abandon him. Couldn't leave the man who'd saved her to die on this rooftop. She looked around wildly for a weapon. Anything. Her eyes landed on a piece of shattered rotor blade, 3 feet of jagged metal that gleamed in the lightning. Selene grabbed it. The tactician had Kael pinned now, massive hands closing around Kael's throat. Kael's face was turning purple. His struggles were weakening. Selene drove the metal shard into the man's back with everything she had. The tactician screamed and rolled off Kyle, clawing at his back where the metal protruded like a grotesque wing. Kale gasped for air, coughing violently. Blood ran from his nose and mouth. "Move!" he croaked. They staggered to the second helicopter together. Jin was already inside, firing through the open door to keep the remaining tactical team pinned down. The pilot had the rotor spinning, ready for immediate takeoff. Kale practically threw Selene into the aircraft, then hauled himself up after her. "Go! Go! Go!" The helicopter lifted off the rooftop as bullets tore through the fuselage. Selene pressed herself flat against the floor, hands over her head, while the world became nothing but noise and terror and the stomach-dropping sensation of rapid altitude gain. 30 seconds later, they were clear of the building, racing through storm clouds toward the dark horizon. Selene sat up slowly, her entire body trembling. Through the helicopter's window, she could see Kyle's building growing smaller below them. Smoke rising from multiple floors, emergency lights flashing, the rooftop still crawling with hostile forces. His fortress, his empire, the safe haven he'd built for her. Burning. Kale sat across from her, pressing a hand against his ribs, where the tactician had landed several brutal blows. Blood dripped from his split lip. His white shirt was more red than white now. "You killed him," Selene said. The words felt distant, like someone else was speaking them. Kale looked at her. "Yes." "You shot Damien. You killed him." "Yes." "I told you not to." "You told me not to unless I had to." Kale's voice was raw from being choked. "He had a gun to your head. I had to." Selene's hand shook as she processed it. Damien was dead. The monster who'd owned her fear for 5 years had been erased in 3 gunshots. She should feel relieved, grateful, free. Instead, she felt numb. "Where are we going?" she asked. Jin answered from the front. "Safe house, 2 hours north, off-grid. They won't find us there." "And then what?" Selene's voice cracked. "They destroyed your building. They'll destroy everything else you own. They'll hunt us until—" "They'll hunt me," Kale interrupted. "Not you." The distinction landed like a punch. Selene stared at him. "What does that mean?" Kale didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window at the city lights fading into darkness below. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Selene's stomach drop. "It means I'm taking you to the safe house, making sure you're secure, and then I'm going back." "That's suicide." "That's war." Kale turned to look at her. "The Young Syndicate just declared it. I can either respond with overwhelming force or watch everything I've built burn to the ground. So you're just going to leave me in some safe house while you wage war? I'm going to keep you alive while I handle the mess I created." "You didn't create this mess. Damien did. Damien gave them an excuse. I gave them a target by taking you in." Kale's expression was harder than Selene had ever seen it. "This ends one of 2 ways. Either I eliminate the Young Syndicate's leadership and reestablish control, or they eliminate me. Either way, you need to be somewhere they can't touch you." The helicopter cut through storm clouds, lightning illuminating Kale's face in stark flashes. He looked like something carved from stone and violence, like a man who'd already made peace with dying. "I won't let you do this alone," Selene said. "You don't have a choice." "The hell I don't." Kale's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You think you're ready to watch what I'm about to do? You think you can stomach the things I'll have to become to win this war? I watched you kill Damien. That was mercy compared to what comes next." Kale leaned forward, his voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "I'm going to burn the Young Syndicate to the ground. I'm going to make examples of anyone who supported this attack. I'm going to remind this city why people don't come at me unless they're prepared to die." The words should have terrified Selene. Instead, they crystallized something that had been building inside her for weeks. She was tired of being protected, tired of being the victim everyone had to save, tired of watching other people fight her battles while she hid in safe rooms and penthouse bedrooms. "Teach me," Selene said. Kale blinked. "What?" "You taught me how to stand my ground, how to push back, how to hit like I mean it." Selene's voice grew stronger. "Teach me the rest. Teach me how to fight, really fight, so I never have to depend on anyone to keep me alive again." No. Why not? Because there's a difference between self-defense and what I do. Kael's jaw tightened. What I do breaks people. Permanently. You don't want that life. You don't get to decide what I want. I get to decide what I'm willing to teach you. They stared at each other across the helicopter's interior, while Jin pretended to be very interested in the instrument panel, and the pilot kept his eyes fixed on the storm ahead. You said I reminded you of yourself, Selene said quietly. You said you wish someone had helped you before you had to figure it out alone. That was about survival. This is about revenge. No, this is about making sure nobody can ever do to me what Damien did. Selene's hands clenched into fists. You think I want to spend the rest of my life running, hiding, depending on armed guards and safe houses? I want to be dangerous, Kael. I want to be the kind of person nobody even thinks about touching. Something shifted in Kael's expression. He studied her like he was seeing her for the first time. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then tell me. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Rain hammered against the helicopter's windows. Lightning illuminated the storm clouds in violent bursts. If I teach you, Kael finally said, there's no going back. You can't unlearn this. You can't return to being the woman who hid in corners and apologized for existing. Good. I don't want to be her anymore. You'll have blood on your hands. I already do. Selene held up her palms, still stained with rust-colored traces from where she'd driven metal into a man's back. I stabbed someone tonight, to save you. And I don't regret it. Kael's eyes darkened. That was adrenaline, survival instinct. What I'm talking about is calculated, cold. Making the decision to hurt someone before they even threaten you, because you know they will eventually. Sounds like you're trying to talk me out of this. I am. Why? Because I like who you're becoming. The admission seemed to cost Kael something. You're getting stronger, braver, learning to take up space without apology. I don't want to be the one who turns that into something dark. Selene leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. What if the dark is what keeps me alive? The question hung in the air between them. Kael Min, the man with dragon tattoos and an empire built on violence, looked at Selene Vale like she was a grenade with the pin already pulled. If I do this, he said slowly, you follow every instruction. No questions, no hesitation. You do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, or people die. Possibly you. I understand. No, you don't. Not yet. Kael's voice was flat. But you will. The helicopter descended toward a dark patch of forest 2 hours north of the city. No lights, no roads, just trees and shadows and a clearing barely large enough for the aircraft to land. As they touched down, Selene caught a glimpse of a structure hidden among the trees, a concrete bunker built into the hillside, camouflaged so well she would have missed it if Jin hadn't pointed it out. This was built during the Cold War, Jin explained as they climbed out of the helicopter. Government fallout shelter. Kael bought it 10 years ago and retrofitted it. Nobody knows it exists except us. They entered through a reinforced steel door that required 3 separate authentication methods. Inside, the bunker was surprisingly well equipped. Clean living quarters, a kitchen, a weapons room that made Selene's breath catch, and a communication center bristling with equipment. Kael immediately went to work. He pulled up encrypted channels on the communication equipment, making rapid-fire calls in Korean and English to people whose names Selene didn't catch. Coordinating, planning, preparing for war. Jean dealt with his shoulder wound while simultaneously monitoring security feeds from what remained of Kael's city operations. The picture was grim. The Young Syndicate had taken advantage of the chaos to seize 3 of Kael's nightclubs and 2 warehouse facilities. They'd moved fast. Professional. Like they'd been planning this for months. Selene stood uselessly in the corner, watching people move around her with purpose while she had none. The adrenaline from the rooftop was fading, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that made her bones ache. She looked down at her hands again. Still blood-stained, still shaking slightly. She'd driven metal into a man's back tonight. She'd felt it punch through clothing and skin and muscle. She'd heard him scream, and she didn't regret it. That realization scared her more than Damien ever had. Get some rest, Kael said without looking up from his equipment. We move at dawn. Move where? Back to the city. I have targets to hit before the Young Syndicate consolidates their position. I'm coming with you. No. You said you'd teach me. I said I'd consider it. Kyle finally looked at her. Right now you're exhausted, injured, and in shock. You're not ready. When will I be ready? Maybe never. The words hit like a slap. Selene's hands clenched into fists. You're doing it again, deciding what I can handle, what I'm ready for, just like Damien did. Kale's expression turned dangerous. Don't compare me to him. Then stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I'm treating you like someone who watched a man die tonight and hasn't processed it yet. I've processed it fine. He's dead. The world's better for it. What else is there to understand? Kyle crossed the room in 3 strides, getting in Selene's face with an intensity that would have made her flinch 2 weeks ago. Now she held her ground. You want to know what else there is to understand? Kyle's voice was low and lethal. How it feels the next morning when the adrenaline is gone and you remember the look in his eyes when the bullets hit. How it feels when you close your eyes and see his blood on the concrete. How it feels knowing you could have walked away, but chose violence instead. You're describing guilt. I'm describing consequences. And you think I can't handle those? I think you haven't earned them yet. Kale stepped back. Guilt is a luxury reserved for people who had other options. You didn't tonight. Everything you did was survival. But if I teach you what you're asking for, that stops being true. You'll make choices that can't be justified by fear or self-defense, and you'll have to live with them. Selene met his eyes without flinching. Maybe I'm ready to start making those choices. Something flickered across Kyle's face. Respect, fear, something else she couldn't name. Get some sleep, Selene. We'll talk about this in the morning. He turned away before she could argue further. Selene was shown to a small room carved into the bunker's interior. A cot, a single lamp, gray concrete walls that pressed in like a prison cell. She lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the rooftop over and over. Damien's blood on the concrete. The man she'd stabbed. The helicopter lifting off while gunfire tore through the air. Kyle's hands around someone's throat. Her own hands still blood-stained. She should feel something. Grief, horror, remorse. Instead, she felt nothing. Just a cold, empty space where her fear used to live. Selene didn't sleep. She lay on the cot listening to muffled voices through the concrete walls. Kale coordinating with what remained of his forces, Jin reporting on casualty counts, someone else discussing weapon shipments. At some point past midnight, footsteps approached her door. A soft knock. Come in, Selene said. Kale stepped through the doorway, still wearing his blood-stained shirt, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Can't sleep? Can you? No. He leaned against the doorframe. Jin told me what you did, on the rooftop, saving me from that tactician. You would have done the same. That's not the point. Kale's eyes searched her face. You could have run to the helicopter. You could have saved yourself. Instead, you came back. You're not the only one who doesn't break promises. Selene sat up on the cot. You promised I was untouchable. I promised I wouldn't leave you to die alone. I never asked for that promise. You didn't have to. Silence stretched between them. Outside the bunker, wind howled through the trees. Inside, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down like a physical thing. I can't protect you from what's coming, Kyle said finally. The Young Syndicate won't stop until they've destroyed everything I've built. And anyone associated with me becomes a target. I know. Which is why you need to stay here, hidden, while I handle this. No. Kale's jaw tightened. Selene, I'm not hiding anymore. Selene stood, crossing to where Kale leaned against the doorframe. You were right earlier. I haven't earned the guilt yet. Everything I did tonight was survival. But I want to earn it, Kyle. I want to make the hard choices. I want to become someone who can stand beside you instead of behind you. You don't know what you're asking. Then show me. They stood inches apart in the cramped doorway. Kale's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for fear, for any sign she didn't mean what she was saying. He wouldn't find it. Selene had spent 5 years being afraid, 5 years being small and invisible and apologizing for existing. That woman died on the rooftop along with Damien Cross. What remained was something harder, Something willing to drive metal into a man's spine to protect the one person who'd ever treated her like she mattered.
If I teach you, Kyle said quietly, you become part of this world, permanently. There's no going back to normal life afterward. I never had a normal life. I had Damien's version of hell, followed by your version of a cage, even if it was a prettier one. Selene held his gaze. I don't want normal. I want power. I want to be dangerous. I want to be someone nobody ever underestimates again. Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded.
Training starts at dawn, he said, and I won't go easy on you. Good. He turned to leave, but Selene's voice stopped him. Kyle. He looked back. Thank you for killing him, for keeping your promise. Selene's voice didn't waver. I know what it cost you. Kyle's expression was unreadable. It cost me nothing. Men like Damien Cross are weeds. Pulling them out makes the garden better. Then what about the man I stabbed? What does that make me? Someone learning to tend her own garden. Kyle's eyes held hers. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow we find out if you're actually ready for this. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Selene sat alone in the concrete room, her hands still faintly blood-stained, and tried to understand what she was becoming. Not a victim anymore. Not innocent. Something in between. Something that could survive in Kyle Min's world of violence and consequence. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror bolted to the wall. The woman staring back had the same face as the terrified girl who'd boarded that subway train weeks ago. But everything behind the eyes had changed. Selene smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. And that was exactly what she needed. Dawn came gray and cold. Selene woke to Jin pounding on her door, barking that she had 5 minutes to get ready. She emerged from her room to find Kyle already awake, looking like he hadn't slept at all, studying maps spread across the bunker's central table. We hit 3 targets today, he was saying to Jin. The warehouse on Pier 47, the gambling den in Chinatown, and the Young Syndicate's primary enforcement house in the industrial district. That's suicide, Jin argued. We don't have the manpower. Which is why we're not fighting fair. Kale tapped a location on the map. We ghost in, hit their supply lines, and disappear before they can respond. Make them bleed resources. Make them spread their forces thin trying to protect everything. Guerrilla tactics. Exactly. Jin noticed Selene standing in the doorway. Is she coming? Kale looked up. His eyes met Selene's across the room. That depends. Can you follow orders without question? Yes. Can you pull a trigger if I tell you to? Selene didn't hesitate. Yes. Can you watch someone die and keep moving? The question hung in the air. Kale wasn't asking theoretically. He was establishing whether she could function in the field. Selene thought about Damien's body on the rooftop, the man she'd stabbed, the hollow feeling in her chest where fear used to live. Yes, she said. Kale nodded slowly. Jin, get her equipped. Standard loadout. Nothing she can't handle. 10 minutes later, Selene stood in the bunker's weapons room while Jin taught her the basics of the pistol he'd selected. A Glock 19, simple and reliable. How to check if it was loaded. How to chamber a round. How to aim center mass. You're not trying to be accurate, Jin explained. You're trying to create stopping power. 2 to the chest. Reassess. Don't think. Just react. Selene's hands shook slightly as she held the weapon. The weight felt wrong, foreign, like holding someone else's nightmare. You sure about this? Jin asked quietly. No, Selene admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Jin almost smiled. That's the only right answer in this line of work. They drove back to the city in an unmarked van, approaching from the north through routes Kyle said were clean of surveillance. The building that had been his fortress looked even worse in daylight. Burn marks scarring the upper floors, windows shattered, police barriers surrounding the perimeter. They're calling it a gas explosion, Kyle said bitterly, watching through binoculars. The Young Syndicate paid off the right people to make sure nobody investigates too closely. Their first target was the warehouse on Pier 47, a supposedly abandoned building that actually served as a weapons cache for Young operations. Kyle's intelligence suggested minimal security, 3 guards maximum. They approached just after noon when foot traffic in the area was highest. hiding in plain sight among dock workers and delivery trucks. Selene's heart hammered as they slipped through a side entrance Jin had picked in under 30 seconds. Inside, the warehouse smelled like rust and salt water and gun oil. Crates stacked to the ceiling, shadows everywhere. Selene's hand rested on the pistol in her jacket pocket, palm sweating against the grip. Kael moved through the space like a ghost, silent, invisible, lethal. Jin covered their six while Selene stayed between them, trying not to breathe too loud. They found the weapons cache in a locked room at the warehouse's center, crates of firearms, ammunition, explosives, enough firepower to wage a small war. Kael started placing charges with clinical precision. We have 4 minutes once I activate the timer. That gets us clear of the blast radius with 30 seconds to spare. What about the guards? Selene whispered. What about them? We can't just blow up the building with people inside. Kael's eyes were cold. Watch me. That's murder. That's war. Kael finished setting the last charge. These men chose their side. They're storing weapons intended to kill my people. They accepted the risk. Selene's stomach twisted. This was what Kael had warned her about. The hard choices, the consequences. I can't, she started, then stay outside. Kael activated the timer. 4 minutes appeared in glowing red numbers. Because I'm not compromising an operation because you're having second thoughts. He walked past her toward the exit. Jin followed. Selene stood alone in the weapons cache, watching the timer count down. 3 minutes, 50 seconds. She could warn the guards, could scream fire and give them time to run. She could also get herself killed and ruin Kael's operation in the process. 3 minutes, 30 seconds. The decision crystallized. Selene turned and ran after Kael. They cleared the warehouse with 45 seconds to spare. From a safe distance 2 blocks away, Selene watched the building explode in a fireball that sent debris raining across the dock. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off. 3 men ran from the warehouse engulfed in flames. Selene watched them burn, and she kept her mouth shut. You okay? Jin asked. No, Selene said honestly. Good. That means you're still human. Jin lit a cigarette, hands steady despite what they'd just done. The day you stop feeling sick is the day you've gone too far. They hit 2 more targets that afternoon, each one following the same pattern: intel gathering, infiltration, destruction, extraction. Each one resulting in casualties Kael treated as acceptable losses. By sunset, the Yang Syndicate had lost 3 major asset locations and at least a dozen men. By sunset, Selene Vale had blood on her hands that couldn't be washed off. They returned to the bunker after dark. Kael immediately went to his communication equipment to assess the fallout. Jin reported that the Yang Syndicate was scrambling, pulling forces back to protect their remaining locations. We hurt them, Jin said, but we also pissed them off. They'll retaliate hard. Let them try. Kael pulled up surveillance feeds. We've already moved to our next position. They'll be hitting empty locations. Selene sat alone in the corner, her hands still shaking from adrenaline crash. She kept seeing those men burning, kept hearing their screams, kept wondering if there was any version of this where she still got to be a good person. Kael found her there an hour later. You did well today, he said. I watched people die. Yes, and you're telling me I did well? You followed orders, kept moving, didn't freeze when it mattered. Kael sat down beside her. That's all I can ask for. Selene looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd saved her life and was now teaching her how to take others. How do you live with it? By remembering that the people we killed today would have killed us without hesitation. Kael's voice was flat. This world doesn't reward mercy, Selene. It rewards strength. You want to survive? You need to be willing to do what weak people won't. And what if that turns me into a monster? Then you'll be a monster who's still breathing. Kael stood. Which is better than being a good person in a grave. He left her alone with that thought. Selene sat in the concrete bunker, her hands blood-stained, her conscience screaming, and understood the truth. She'd crossed a line today, and there was no going back. The woman who'd hidden in corners and apologized for existing was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone capable of watching men burn and keeping silent. Someone Damien Cross would have feared. Selene looked at her reflection in the darkened window. and she didn't recognize the woman staring back. But she understood finally what Kael had been trying to tell her. This was the price of power. This was what it cost to never be a victim again. And Selene Vale was willing to pay it, even if it meant losing herself in the process. 3 days of guerrilla warfare turned Black Ridge City into a chessboard where every move carried the weight of lives. Selene learned to sleep in 4-hour increments between operations, learned to eat cold food without tasting it, learned to check her weapon before checking her reflection because mirrors stopped mattering when survival was the only metric that counted. Kael ran his war from the bunker's communication center, coordinating strikes with military precision while the Yang Syndicate bled resources trying to protect assets they didn't know were already compromised. Every warehouse they burned, every supply route they disrupted, every enforcer they eliminated. The attacks were surgical, devastating, and exactly calculated to create maximum chaos with minimum exposure. But wars weren't won with tactics alone. They were won by whoever could endure the most pain. On the 4th morning, Selene woke to find Kael staring at satellite imagery of a compound in the industrial district. His eyes were bloodshot. Dark circles carved shadows beneath them. He looked like he hadn't slept since the rooftop. "What is it?" Selene asked. Kael tapped the screen. The Yang Syndicate's Central Command, where their leadership operates, where they coordinate everything. His finger circled a reinforced building surrounded by shipping containers and warehouse structures. "If we take this location, we decapitate their entire operation." "How many men are we talking about?" "Defending?" Kael pulled up thermal imaging. 30, maybe 40. All armed, all trained, all willing to die protecting their bosses. Jin appeared in the doorway, his shoulders still bandaged but his eyes sharp. "That's suicide. Even with our full force, we'd be outnumbered 3-1. Which is why we're not using our full force." Kael zoomed in on the compound's perimeter. "Most of those 40 men will be positioned outside, guarding approaches, watching for frontal assault. They're expecting us to hit them the same way we've been hitting their other locations." "And we're not?" Selene said. "No, we're walking through the front door." Kael's smile was cold and sharp. "While they're busy watching for guerrilla tactics, we go conventional, brazen, make them think we've lost our minds." "Because we have," Jin muttered. "Maybe." Kael stood, rolling his shoulders like a fighter preparing for the cage. "But desperation creates opportunities. They think we're scattered, broken, running on fumes. They won't expect a direct assault on their headquarters." "How many do we have?" Selene asked. 12. Kael met her eyes. "Counting you." The number landed like a stone in still water. 12 against 40. The mathematics were brutal. "When?" Jin asked. "Tonight, before they can reinforce after this morning's attacks." Kael started pulling weapons from secured cases. "We hit them at shift change when security is transitioning, create confusion, use their numbers against them. And if we fail," Selene's voice was steady despite her hammering heart, "then the Yang Syndicate wins. They consolidate power. They hunt down everyone associated with me and make examples of them." Kael loaded a magazine with mechanical efficiency. "And you spend the rest of your life running from people who don't forget and don't forgive." The bunker transformed into a war room. Kael's remaining forces arrived throughout the day. Hard-eyed men and 2 women who moved with the same lethal precision Selene recognized from weeks of watching Jin work. They spoke in clipped sentences, checking weapons and memorizing building layouts, with the focus of people who understood exactly how thin the margin for error would be. Selene stood among them, holding her Glock 19, feeling like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. These were professionals. Veterans of conflicts she couldn't begin to understand, and she was supposed to stand beside them in a firefight that would determine whether everyone in this room lived or died. "You don't have to do this," Kael said quietly, appearing at her shoulder. "Yes, I do." "No, you can stay here. Guard the bunker. Nobody would think less of you." Selene turned to face him. "I would." Kael studied her face, searching for doubt. "This isn't like the warehouse. This is sustained combat, close quarters, people shooting back. It's chaos and terror and the very real possibility that you die screaming in some shipping container while I'm too busy staying alive to help you." "I know," Do you? Kale stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because once we're in that compound, there's no extraction if things go wrong, no helicopter rescue, no last-minute salvation. If we fail, we die there. All of us. Then we don't fail. Something flickered in Kael's expression. Pride, fear, resignation. You've changed. You changed me. I gave you tools. You chose what to build with them. Kael's hand touched her shoulder briefly, then dropped. Stay close to Jin. Follow his lead. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? I'm not leaving you to die. That's not your decision to make. The hell it isn't. They stared at each other while the bunker buzzed with preparation around them. Two people who'd met on a subway train weeks ago, now preparing to wage war together against an empire built on violence and control. If we survive this, Kael said quietly, remind me that I'm an idiot for letting you come. If we survive this, Selene replied, I'll remind you that I didn't need your permission. Kael almost smiled. Then his expression hardened back into the cold mask he wore when preparing for violence. Gear up. We leave in 2 hours. The drive into the city felt like descending into hell. They used 3 separate vehicles to avoid presenting a single target, approaching the industrial district from different directions. Selene rode with Jin and 2 others whose names she'd learned but whose faces still seemed interchangeable in the darkness. First time? One of them asked. A woman in her 30s with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow. Yes, Selene admitted. You scared? Terrified. The woman smiled. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being scared that you get sloppy. She checked her rifle. Stay low. Move fast. Don't hesitate. Hesitation kills more people than bullets. The compound appeared ahead, a fortress of steel and concrete illuminated by harsh industrial lights. Shipping containers stacked like walls. Guard towers at each corner. Men with rifles patrolling the perimeter in pairs, exactly as Kael's intelligence had described. They parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through shadows between abandoned warehouses. Selene's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. Sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cold night air. Her hands trembled slightly on her weapon. Kael appeared beside her like a ghost. Breathe. Selene forced air into her lungs. In, out, in, out. Better. Kael's eyes scanned the compound. We go in 2 teams. Mine hits the main entrance, creates noise, draws security. Jin's team uses the distraction to breach the east wall and secure the interior. You're with Jin. What about you? I'll be busy not dying. Kael checked his watch. Shift change in 4 minutes. That's our window. The next 4 minutes stretched like hours. Selene crouched behind a rusted container, watching guards move across the compound with flashlights and radios. Professional. Alert. Not expecting an attack, but prepared for one anyway. Then Kael's voice crackled through the radio. 3, 2, 1, execute. The world exploded into violence. Kael's team hit the main gate with breaching charges that blew the reinforced doors inward with a concussive blast that rattled Selene's teeth. Gunfire erupted immediately, Kael's forces pouring suppressing fire into the compound while guards scrambled to respond. Move, Jin barked. Selene ran. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, operating on autopilot while her mind tried to process the chaos. They reached the east wall while attention focused on the main gate. Jin placed a smaller charge against the corrugated metal, and they all pressed flat against the ground. The explosion punched a hole through the wall big enough to drive a car through. Jin went first, weapon raised, scanning for targets. The woman with the scar followed. Then Selene, her hands white-knuckled on her pistol, trying to remember everything she'd been taught. Center mass. 2 shots. Reassess. Don't think. React. The compound's interior was a maze of shipping containers and warehouse structures. Gunfire echoed from multiple directions. Kael's team engaging at the front. Security forces responding. Chaos propagating through the space like a virus. Jin's team moved through the maze with practiced efficiency, clearing corners and checking angles. They encountered 2 guards near a container marked with Yong Syndicate symbols. The guards raised their weapons. Jin fired twice. Both guards dropped. Selene's stomach lurched, but her feet kept moving. They pushed deeper into the compound, following Kael's briefing to the central command building. a two-story structure at the heart of the maze. Gunfire intensified as they approached. Someone screamed. Something exploded. The night became nothing but noise and muzzle flashes and the acrid smell of gunpowder. A guard appeared from behind a container, rifle rising. Selene's training took over. She raised her pistol, aimed center mass, fired twice. The guard staggered backward, surprise replacing aggression on his face. He fell. Selene kept moving. No time to process. No time to feel. Just movement and survival and the terrible understanding that she'd just killed someone. Jin kicked open the command building's door. Inside was organized chaos, computer stations, filing cabinets, 3 men in expensive suits scrambling to destroy documents, while guards positioned at windows returned fire toward Kael's advancing team. "Down!" Jin roared. The guards turned, opened fire. Bullets tore through the doorframe where Selene's head had been seconds before. She pressed herself flat against the exterior wall, heart hammering, ears ringing from the gunfire. Jin and his team returned fire through the doorway. The interior of the building became a killing box, overlapping fields of fire, ricochets sparking off metal surfaces, people shouting in Korean and English in pure wordless rage. One of Jin's team went down, clutching his leg and cursing. "Cover me!" Jin yelled, and disappeared into the building. Selene had 3 seconds to make a decision: stay outside in relative safety, or follow Jin into hell. She followed. The interior was exactly as chaotic as she'd feared. Jin engaged 2 guards near the stairwell, trading shots at point-blank range. The 3 men in suits had pulled weapons and were firing wildly. Bullets punched through computer monitors and shattered windows, and turned the command center into a war zone. Selene saw one of the suited men aiming at Jin's back. She fired, once, twice, 3 times. The man dropped. Jin spun, saw Selene, nodded once. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just a soldier recognizing another soldier had done their job. They cleared the first floor in 90 brutal seconds. 6 bodies, blood everywhere, documents scattered across destroyed workstations. "Upstairs," Jin said. "That's where leadership will be." The stairwell was narrow and exposed. Each step felt like offering herself to a firing squad. But Jin went first, weapon raised, and Selene followed because turning back wasn't an option anymore. The second floor opened into a conference room where 4 men sat around a table, not scrambling, not panicking, waiting. The center figure was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes like chipped ice. He smiled when Jin and Selene entered. "Kael Min sends children now?" he said in accented English. Jin's weapon never wavered. "Song Yong, you're done." Song Yong's smile widened. "Am I? I count 2 of you, 4 of us, and a building full of my men who will tear you apart the moment they finish with your boss." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, does Kael really think killing me ends this? I have sons, lieutenants, an entire organization built to survive decapitation." "Then we'll keep cutting until there's nothing left," Jin said. Brave words. Song Yong nodded to the men around him. They moved simultaneously, pulling weapons from beneath the table. Jin fired first, dropped one. The others returned fire. The conference room exploded into chaos. Jin dove behind an overturned table. Selene threw herself to the floor as bullets tore through the air where she'd been standing, her weapon discharged. Once, twice. She wasn't aiming, just firing in the general direction of the muzzle flashes, trying to survive the next 3 seconds. Someone screamed, glass shattered. Jin's weapon clicked empty and he transitioned to his sidearm without hesitation. Then silence. Selene looked up from behind the minimal cover of a filing cabinet. 3 of Song Yong's men lay dead. The 4th was clutching his shoulder, blood pulsing between his fingers. Song Yong himself sat unmoved in his chair, hands folded on the table, still smiling. "Impressive," he said. "Perhaps Kael chose his soldiers better than I gave him credit for." Jin approached slowly, weapon trained on Song Yong's head. "It's over." "Is it?" Song Yong's eyes flicked to something behind Jin. Jin spun. The wounded man had raised his weapon with his good hand, aiming at Jin's back. Selene fired. The man dropped. Jin looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since they'd entered the building. "You're learning." "Touching," Song Yong said, "but futile." "You're alone," Jin said. "Your men are dying. Your compound is burning. You've lost." "I've lost this round." Song Yong stood slowly, hands visible. But this war has just begun. Kill me. My sons will continue. My organization will rebuild. And eventually they'll find everyone Kael Min ever cared about and make them pay for tonight.
Then we'll deal with them too, Selene said. Her voice surprised her, steady, cold, nothing like the terrified woman who'd boarded a subway train weeks ago. Song Yong's eyes found her. Ah, the girl. The excuse for all this violence. Tell me, child, was it worth it? All these deaths? All this destruction? Just so you could escape one bad man? Yes, Selene said without hesitation.
Song Yong laughed. Kael Min has taught you well. You sound just like him. Cold, certain, willing to burn the world for personal vendetta. He stepped closer to Jin, ignoring the weapon pointed at his skull. But let me teach you something he won't. This life, it doesn't end well. You think you're strong now. You think you've found power. But power is a poison that kills slowly. And by the time you realize you're dying, it's too late to stop. Enough, Jin said. Is it? Song Yong smiled. Or are you afraid I'm right? The radio crackled. Kael's voice, strained but alive. Jin, status. Jin keyed the radio without lowering his weapon. Second floor secured. We have Song Yong. A pause. Then, bring him down. We're holding the courtyard, but barely. We need to move. Copy. Song Yong raised his hands. I'll go peacefully. No need for drama. Jin zip-tied Song Yong's wrists behind his back while Selene covered them. They moved down the stairs, through the devastated first floor, into the compound's courtyard. The scene was apocalyptic. Bodies everywhere. Kyle's forces had taken the courtyard, but at terrible cost. 3 of his 12 were down. Maybe dead. Maybe dying. Kael himself stood in the center of the chaos, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead, his shirt torn and soaked through. But he was standing, and in his hand was the detonator. What is that? Song Yong demanded. Kael's eyes were flat, empty. Insurance. We planted charges throughout your compound while your men were busy dying. Every warehouse, every container, every structure you use to store weapons and money and everything else that makes your organization function. Song Yong's face went pale. You wouldn't. I already have. Kael's thumb hovered over the detonator. You're right about one thing. Killing you doesn't end this. Your sons will rebuild. So I'm not just killing you. I'm erasing everything you built, burning it all to ash, making it so expensive to resurrect your empire that nobody will bother. You're insane. No, I'm thorough. Kael looked at Jin. Get everyone to the extraction point. 90 seconds. Jin didn't argue. He grabbed Selene's arm and pulled her toward the hole they'd blown in the east wall. The remaining forces followed, moving wounded between them, abandoning the compound as fast as their injuries allowed. Selene looked back. Kael stood alone in the courtyard with Song Yong, the detonator in his hand, surrounded by the dead and dying. Kael! Selene screamed. We need to go! I know. Kael's voice was eerily calm. I'll be right behind you. I'm not leaving without you. Yes, Kael said. You are. Jin, get her out of here. Jin's grip tightened on Selene's arm, dragging her toward the wall. She fought him, screaming Kael's name, trying to break free. Then the first charge detonated. The explosion knocked Selene off her feet. Jin shielded her body with his as debris rained from the sky. Secondary explosions followed, warehouse after warehouse igniting in a chain reaction that turned night into day. Selene scrambled to her feet, ears ringing, vision blurred. Through the smoke and fire, she could see the command building collapsing, could see flames consuming everything, could see Kael running through hell toward them. He was 50 feet away when the final charge detonated. The shockwave lifted Kael off his feet and threw him forward like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. No! Selene tore free from Jin's grip and ran. Bullets kicked up dirt around her, surviving guards firing from somewhere in the inferno. She didn't care, didn't slow down. She reached Kael and grabbed his jacket, trying to drag him toward safety. He was too heavy. Help me, Selene screamed. Jin appeared, cursing. Between them, they hauled Kael's limp body through the hole in the wall just as another section of the compound collapsed behind them. They ran through the industrial district, half carrying Kael while sirens wailed in the distance. Police. Fire department. Emergency services finally responding to what sounded like a war zone. The extraction vehicles waited where they'd left them. They threw Kyle into the back of Jin's van and peeled out, heading north toward the bunker while Black Ridge City burned behind them. Selene pressed her hands against Kyle's chest, checking for breath, for a heartbeat, for any sign he was still alive. His eyes opened. "Did you get him?" Kyle rasped. "What?" "Song Yong. Did you get him out?" Understanding hit Selene like a physical blow. "You left him there. He said his sons would rebuild. I made sure there was nothing left to rebuild from." Kale coughed, blood flecking his lips. "No body to honor, no empire to inherit, just ash. You could have died."
"I almost did." Kale's hand found hers, gripping weakly. "But you came back for me." "Of course I did. I told you to run." "I don't follow orders well." Kale's smile was pained. "I noticed." The bunker's medical room smelled like antiseptic and blood. The doctor, a different one than had treated Selene weeks ago, worked on Kyle with grim efficiency. Broken ribs, concussion, second-degree burns across his back from the final explosion. He'd survive, but barely. Selene sat outside this medical room, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. She'd killed people tonight. 3 that she could confirm. Maybe more in the chaos. The warehouse guard who'd appeared from behind the container. The suited man who'd been aiming at Jin. The wounded man in the conference room. She should feel something. Horror. Guilt. Remorse. Instead, she felt nothing. Just exhaustion and the terrible understanding that this was her life now. Jin found her there 2 hours later. His shoulder had been rebandaged. His face was gray with fatigue. "We lost 4, he said quietly. 3 dead. 1 critical who might not make it. I'm sorry." "Don't be. They knew the risks." Jin sat down beside her. "You did good tonight. I killed people. You saved people too, including Kale. That counts for something." Selene looked at her hands, still faintly bloodstained despite washing them twice. "Does it get easier?"
"No." Jin's voice was flat. "It gets familiar. That's not the same thing."
"How do you live with it?" "By remembering that the alternative is being dead." Jin stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we figure out what's left of Kyle's empire and whether we can rebuild." He left her alone in the hallway. Selene sat there until dawn, listening to the doctor work on Kyle behind the closed door, trying to understand what she'd become. Not a victim anymore, not innocent, a soldier in a war she'd never asked to fight. Kyle emerged from the medical room 3 hours later, his torso wrapped in bandages, moving like every breath hurt. But he was standing, walking, alive. "You should be resting," Selene said. "So should you." Kale lowered himself onto the bench beside her with visible effort. "But neither of us are very good at following medical advice." They sat in silence for a long moment. "Song Yong is dead," Kale finally said. "His compound is destroyed. His organization is scattered. We won." "Did we?" Selene's voice was hollow. 4 of your people died. You almost died. The Young Syndicate might be broken, but there are probably 5 other organizations waiting to fill the vacuum. Probably. So what was the point? Kale turned to look at her. The point was that nobody gets to threaten what's mine without paying for it. Song Yong used you as an excuse to attack me. I used that as an excuse to erase him. Now everyone else in this city knows what happens when they come at me. More violence, more death, forever. Welcome to my world. Kael's voice was tired. I told you it wasn't pretty. Selene stood abruptly. I need air. She walked out of the bunker into gray morning light. The forest around them was silent except for birds and wind through trees, peaceful. Like the war they'd waged hours ago belonged to a different universe. Kyle followed her out despite his injuries. Talk to me, he said. About what? About how I killed 3 people last night and feel nothing? About how I'm turning into exactly the kind of monster you warned me about? You're not a monster. Then what am I? Selene spun to face him. Because the woman who got on that subway train weeks ago wouldn't have shot someone without hesitation. She wouldn't have watched a compound burn with people inside. She wouldn't have chosen violence over every other option. No, Kyle agreed. She wouldn't have. But that woman also couldn't have survived tonight. Couldn't have saved my life. Couldn't have stood in a firefight and kept moving forward. Maybe I liked her better.
Maybe. Kale stepped closer. But she was dying, slowly. Damien was killing her piece by piece every day. At least now you're alive. At what cost? Whatever it takes. Kale's eyes held hers. You asked me to teach you, to make you dangerous, to turn you into someone nobody could hurt again. I did exactly what you asked.
I know, Selene's voice cracked, and I hate that I'm grateful for it.
Kale reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face. You're allowed to be both. Grateful and horrified. Strong and scared. A survivor, and someone who wishes she didn't have to survive this way. How do you do it? Selene whispered. Live with all the blood on your hands? By remembering that every person I've killed was trying to kill me first. Or hurt someone I was protecting. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And by accepting that I'm not a good person, I stopped trying to be one years ago. All I can do now is be effective. I don't want to lose myself. You won't. Because you're asking these questions, feeling these doubts. Monsters don't worry about becoming monstrous. They just are. Selene closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite everything. This man had saved her life, had taught her to fight, had killed for her and almost died because of her. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing him as just her protector. She'd started seeing him as something more. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. The Young Syndicate is broken but not eliminated. Their remaining leadership will come for us eventually. We need to be ready. That's not what I meant. Kale's hand dropped from her face. Then what did you mean? Selene opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. What happens with us? After all this? After I've become someone who can stand in your world without flinching? The question hung in the air between them. Kale was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he finally admitted. I didn't plan for you to stay this long, didn't plan for you to become this capable, didn't plan for… He stopped. For what? Selene pressed. For you to matter this much. The admission landed like lightning. Kyle Min, the man who commanded empires and spoke in certainties, was admitting that something had changed, that Selene had become more than just another person he was protecting. You matter to me too, Selene said quietly. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. I know, which is why we should keep distance, maintain professional boundaries, make sure personal feelings don't compromise operational effectiveness. Is that what you want? Kale's jaw tightened. What I want doesn't matter. What's safe for you matters. I haven't been safe since the moment I got in your car. Selene stepped closer, and I'm tired of pretending that keeping distance will change that. Selene, she kissed him. For 3 seconds, Kyle didn't respond, didn't move, stood absolutely still, like he was trying to decide whether to pull away or give in. Then his hand tangled in her hair, and he kissed her back with 5 weeks of suppressed wanting. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and desperate and tasted like blood and smoke and survival. Selene's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer despite his injuries, despite every rational reason this was a terrible idea. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he said. Probably. It compromises everything. I know. We should stop. We should. Neither of them moved. The forest around them was silent. The bunker behind them held the remnants of a war they'd barely survived. The city below them was waking up to news of an industrial district compound reduced to ash. And in the middle of all that chaos, Selene Vale and Kyle Min stood wrapped around each other like drowning people clutching the same piece of driftwood. If we do this, Kyle said quietly, there's no taking it back. No pretending we're just allies. No maintaining professional distance. Good. I'm tired of distance. It makes you a target. Anyone who wants to hurt me will come after you. They already do. At least this way, I'll have a reason to fight back that isn't just survival. Kale pulled back enough to look at her face. What reason? You. Something shifted in his expression. The cold mask he wore cracked, revealing the man underneath, scarred, dangerous, but capable of feeling things he pretended not to. "You're going to be the death of me," he said, "or you'll be the death of me." "Probably both." Selene smiled despite everything, despite the blood and the bodies and the terrible understanding that their lives would never be simple or safe or anything resembling normal. "I can live with that," she said. "So can I." They stood in the forest as morning light filtered through the trees, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided to hold on anyway. The war wasn't over. The Young Syndicate's remnants would regroup. Other organizations would see opportunity in the chaos. Violence would follow them like a shadow, because that was the price of Kael Mean's world. But for the first time since boarding that subway train, Selene wasn't afraid of what came next, because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She was facing it beside the man who'd taught her that survival wasn't enough. That power was earned through blood and choice, and refusing to ever be a victim again. And together, they would burn down anyone who thought otherwise. The bunker's radio crackled. Jin's voice, urgent. "Boss, we've got incoming. 3 vehicles, armed, moving fast toward our position." The moment shattered. Kael's expression hardened instantly back into the tactical commander. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe less." "Young remnants?" "Unknown, but they know we're here." Kael looked at Selene. "This is it. Last chance to walk away. I can get you somewhere safe, somewhere far from all this." Selene's hand found her weapon, still holstered, still ready. "No," she said. "I stand with you, whatever comes." Kael smiled, cold, sharp, deadly. "Then let's show them what happens when they come for us." They walked back into the bunker together, side by side, preparing for the war that would never truly end. And Selene Vale, who'd once been invisible, forgettable, nothing, became exactly what she'd always needed to be: untouchable, dangerous, free. The 3 vehicles appeared through the trees exactly 9 minutes later, engines roaring, headlights cutting through morning mist. Kael's remaining forces took positions around the bunker's perimeter, weapons ready, faces grim. Selene stood beside Kael, her heart steady, her hands sure, waiting to see who would step out of those vehicles, and whether they'd come for negotiation or annihilation. The lead vehicle's door opened, and everything Selene thought she understood about this war. The lead vehicle's door opened. A woman stepped out, tall, mid-40s, Korean, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that somehow remained pristine despite the forest dirt and morning dew. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were the same chipped ice color Selene had seen in Song Yong's face before the compound burned. Behind her, armed men emerged from the other 2 vehicles, not the chaotic tactical teams from the compound raid. These moved with military precision, professional, disciplined, soldiers, not thugs. Kael's hand moved to his weapon, but the woman raised her palm in a gesture that clearly meant peace. "Kael Min," she called across the clearing, "I'm here to talk, not fight." "You brought an army for a conversation," Kael said. His weapon remained holstered, but his entire body was coiled with tension. "And you burned my father alive last night. Forgive me for taking precautions." The woman walked forward slowly, hands visible. "My name is Song Min Hee. I'm Song Yong's eldest daughter, and before you start calculating how many bullets it will take to kill everyone I brought, let me save you the math. You can't, not without dying in the process, and I suspect you're tired of dying." Selene watched this woman approach with the confidence of someone who'd never been afraid in her life. Everything about her screamed power, not the brutish violence of her father's organization, but something more refined, more dangerous. "What do you want?" Kael asked. Minhee stopped 20 feet from the bunker entrance, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid immediate threat. "To offer you something my father was too proud to consider: peace." The word landed like a stone in still water. "Your father declared war," Kael said, "used an innocent woman as an excuse to attack my home, killed my people. You'll forgive me for being skeptical about peace offers from his daughter. My father was a dinosaur who thought he could win wars the old way, with violence and territory and body counts." Minhee's voice was clinical, detached. "He was wrong, and it cost him everything. I'm not interested in repeating his mistakes." "Then what are you interested in? Stability, profit, A city where we both operate without bleeding resources fighting each other. Minhee glanced at the bunker, at Kael's forces positioned around the perimeter. You cost my organization millions last night. Destroyed infrastructure it will take years to rebuild. Killed some of our best people. By every metric, I should be here for revenge. But you're not, Selene said. Minhee's eyes found her, sharp, calculating. You must be the girl. The excuse my father used to start this war. I have a name. I'm sure you do. Minhee's tone wasn't dismissive, just factual. My father thought you were a weakness, a vulnerable point he could exploit to bring Kael Min down. He was wrong about that too. He died wrong about a lot of things, Kael said. Yes, he did. Minhee pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. Which is why I'm here, to offer you a treaty. Formal borders, agreed-upon territories, profit-sharing arrangements for ventures where our interests overlap, everything documented, everything clear. And in exchange, you stop burning my father's legacy to the ground. You let what remains of the Yong Syndicate rebuild under my leadership. You accept that this city is big enough for both our organizations to thrive. Minhee held out the envelope. Or you refuse, and we keep bleeding each other dry until someone weaker fills the vacuum we create. Kael didn't move to take the envelope. Your father tried to kill me, tried to take her. He gestured toward Selene. You expect me to make peace with the organization that did that? I expect you to be pragmatic. Minhee's voice hardened. My father is dead. His compound is ash. His top lieutenants burned with him. You've had your revenge, Kael. The question is whether you're satisfied with that, or whether you need to keep killing until everyone associated with the Yong name is in the ground. The challenge hung in the morning air. Selene watched Kael's face, trying to read the calculations happening behind his eyes. This woman was offering exactly what wars were supposed to end with: negotiated peace, defined territories, mutual benefit. But it meant accepting that the people who'd attacked them, who'd forced Selene to kill, who'd almost destroyed everything they'd built, would continue existing just across some invisible line. I need to discuss this with my people, Kael said finally. Of course. Minhee set the envelope on the hood of her vehicle. You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and we return to the old way of doing things. War until one of us is destroyed completely. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what my father did. He was brilliant once, but age and paranoia made him reckless. You did the city a favor by ending him. She walked back to her vehicle without waiting for a response. The armed men followed, their weapons never raised, their movements professional and controlled. The 3 vehicles disappeared back into the forest, leaving only dust and an envelope on the hood of the lead car. Kael walked forward slowly and picked up the envelope. Inside was a formal contract, 10 pages of legal terminology and territorial maps and profit-sharing percentages. It's real, Jin said, reading over Kael's shoulder. She's actually offering legitimate peace. Or a trap, one of the other men said. Either way, we need to decide. Kael looked at his remaining forces. 8 people, 3 of them injured, all of them exhausted. We can keep fighting, hunt down every Yong remnant, salt the earth where their organization stood, or we can take this deal and focus on rebuilding what we lost. What about justice? Selene asked quietly. Kael turned to her. What about it? Songyong tried to kill us. His people destroyed your building, killed your friends. And now his daughter walks away with an intact organization and a negotiated settlement? Selene's voice grew harder. Where's the justice in that? There isn't any. Kael's expression was flat. Justice is a luxury reserved for people who can afford it. We're not those people. We're survivors. And sometimes surviving means accepting that revenge isn't sustainable. So we just let them win? We let them exist. That's not the same thing. Kael folded the contract. Songyong is dead. His empire is crippled. We proved that attacking us costs more than anyone wants to pay. That's victory in this world, not perfect, not satisfying, but real. Selene wanted to argue, wanted to demand complete annihilation of everyone who'd hurt them. But looking at Kael's face, bruised, exhausted, still bleeding through bandages, she understood the truth. He was tired of war. They all were. What do you want to do? Selene asked. Kael looked at her for a long moment. I want to stop losing people.
I want to rebuild. I want to wake up one morning without calculating casualty projections before breakfast. He paused. But this isn't just my decision anymore. You're part of this now. You fought beside us, killed for us. Your vote matters. The words carried weight Selene hadn't expected. She'd gone from invisible victim to soldier to someone whose opinion mattered in decisions that would reshape the city's criminal landscape. If we take this deal, Selene said slowly, what happens to us? To me? You stay, build a life here, under my protection, with my resources as my... Kyle stopped, searching for the right word. Partner, Selene finished. Not as someone you're protecting, not as someone who needs saving, as an equal. Yes. And if we refuse the deal, keep fighting, then we probably die within the month. The young remnants will regroup. Other organizations will see opportunity in the chaos. We'll fight on 3 fronts until we run out of bullets, or people, or both. The choice was brutal in its simplicity. Peace and survival, or revenge and annihilation. Selene thought about the woman she'd been on that subway train. Terrified. Broken. Convinced her life would end in Damien's apartment with nobody noticing she was gone. That woman would have chosen safety, would have taken any deal that promised survival. But Selene wasn't that woman anymore. I vote for peace, she said. Not because I forgive them, not because I think they deserve to exist, but because I'm tired of blood being the only language we speak. Kyle nodded slowly. Jin? Peace, Jin said. We've lost too many already. The others agreed one by one. Not enthusiastically, not happily, but with the weary acceptance of people who'd survived hell and didn't want to return. Then it's decided. Kyle tucked the contract into his jacket. I'll meet with Min-hee tomorrow, negotiate final terms, establish boundaries. He looked at Selene. And after that, we figure out what normal looks like. Do we get to have normal? Selene asked. No, but we can pretend. The next 48 hours were a blur of negotiations and repositioning. Kyle met with Song Min-hee in neutral territory, a restaurant owned by a third party who had no stake in either organization. They hammered out details, adjusted boundaries, agreed on profit splits for overlapping ventures, and slowly, impossibly, peace emerged. Not friendship, not forgiveness, just a mutual understanding that continued war benefited nobody except their enemies. Selene watched from the sidelines as Kyle rebuilt his shattered empire, reclaimed properties, compensated families of the fallen, established new security protocols to prevent another catastrophic breach. He moved through it all with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. But something had changed in him. He delegated more, trusted his people to handle operations without his direct oversight, spent less time in war rooms and more time with Selene, teaching her the business side of his world. Crime is just commerce with extra steps, Kyle explained one evening, showing her financial spreadsheets that would have looked legitimate to any accountant. People want things that are illegal. We provide those things. The violence is just overhead cost for market protection. That's the most cynical thing I've ever heard, Selene said. That's reality. Kyle closed the laptop. Morality is a luxury maintained by people who've never had to choose between their principles and their survival. We don't get that luxury. Do you ever regret it, this life? Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Every day, and never. It's both simultaneously. That's a contradiction. Welcome to being human. Selene studied his face in the lamplight. The dragon tattoos on his throat seemed to move with each breath. Scars she hadn't noticed before traced across his knuckles, each one telling a story of violence survived. Why me? She asked. Of all the people you could have helped, all the victims who needed saving, why did you choose me? Kyle met her eyes. Because when I saw you on that subway, bleeding and terrified but still moving forward, I recognized something I'd lost years ago. The will to survive even when survival seemed impossible. Most people break when they hit their limit. You just found a new way to keep going. And now? Now you don't need me to keep going. You've learned to stand on your own. Kyle's hand found hers across the table, which makes the fact that you're choosing to stay with me mean something. Did you think I'd leave? I thought you should. This life isn't safe. It's not stable. It's not anything a sane person would choose if they had better options. Maybe I'm not sane anymore.
Or maybe you finally become who you were always supposed to be. Kael's thumb traced across her knuckles. Someone strong enough to survive this world without losing themselves in the process. Selene looked down at their joined hands. Hers still bore faint scars from the rooftop. His were marked by decades of violence. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided survival was better together than apart. "I love you," she said. The words landed between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Kael went absolutely still. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because love is a vulnerability. It's a weapon people will use against us. It makes everything more complicated." "I don't care." "You should." "But I don't." Selene squeezed his hand. "I love you, Kael Min, and I'm tired of pretending I don't just because it's tactically inconvenient." Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in his expression cracked. The cold mask he wore slipped, revealing the man underneath, scarred, dangerous, but capable of feeling things he'd spent years denying. "I love you too," he said quietly, "and it terrifies me." "Good. We can be terrified together." Kael pulled her close, and Selene let herself be held by the man who'd saved her life, and then taught her how to save herself. They sat in comfortable silence while the city glowed beyond the windows, a sprawling empire of light and shadow that they'd both bled to protect. 3 weeks after the treaty was signed, Selene stood on the balcony of Kael's rebuilt penthouse overlooking Blackridge City. The building was different now, same location, new construction, better security. But the view was identical, endless skyline, millions of lives moving below. A world that had no idea what violence had been waged to maintain the fragile peace they took for granted. Kael appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He'd healed well. The burns had faded to pink scars across his back. The broken ribs no longer made him wince with every breath. "Thinking about running?" he asked, handing her a glass. "Always." Selene took a sip. "But I never actually leave." "Why not?" "Because running implies I'm afraid of what I'll find if I stay. And I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be. This life doesn't have happy endings." "Maybe not, but it has real ones." Selene turned to face him. "And real is better than the fantasy I was living before. Pretending Damien was just having a bad day. Pretending everything would be fine if I just stayed quiet enough. And now? Now I know that nothing is fine. Everything is broken and dangerous and sustained by violence and compromise and people making hard choices every single day." Selene smiled. "And I'd rather live in that truth than die in a comfortable lie." Kael set down his wine glass and pulled her close. "You've changed. You changed me." "No, I gave you tools. You did the changing yourself." They stood wrapped around each other while the city hummed below. Somewhere in those streets, the Yong Syndicate was rebuilding under Minhee's leadership. Somewhere, other criminals were plotting their own moves in the endless chess game of power and territory. Somewhere, victims were becoming survivors, and survivors were deciding whether to remain victims or become something else entirely. Selene had made her choice. She'd chosen power over safety, honesty over comfort, a dangerous life lived on her own terms over a safe existence lived on someone else's. "I want to help them," Selene said suddenly. "Help who?" "People like I was. Women trapped with men like Damien. People who think they're invisible and worthless and nobody would notice if they disappeared." Kael pulled back to look at her face. "That's dangerous. Domestic abusers don't let their victims go quietly. You'd be making enemies every time you intervened." "Good. I'm tired of having nothing worth protecting." Selene's voice was steady. "You built an empire on violence and commerce. I want to build something else. A network. Safe houses. Resources. Exit strategies for people who need them. Using my money and protection. Yes. To directly antagonize men who will see it as theft of property they own. Also yes." Kael studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the cold smile he gave enemies. The real one that rarely appeared. "You're going to be more trouble than you're worth." "Probably. And I'm going to have to commit resources to protecting something that generates zero profit." "Definitely. When do we start?" The question made Selene's chest tighten. "You're serious?" You think I fell in love with someone safe and convenient? Kale's hand cupped her face. You survived 5 years of hell and came out the other side dangerous. Now you want to help others do the same. That's exactly the kind of beautiful recklessness I can support. Selene kissed him then, pouring weeks of survival and violence and transformation into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I was supposed to be nothing, she whispered. Damien spent 5 years convincing me I was worthless. And now I'm standing in a penthouse above the city, planning to build an empire that saves people like I was. How did this happen? You refused to stay broken. Kale's voice was quiet but absolute. Most people would have given up, would have accepted Damien's version of reality. But you kept fighting, kept surviving. And when I offered you a way out, you didn't just take it. You demanded more. I demanded to become dangerous. And you did. But you didn't lose yourself in the process. That's rare. Selene looked out at the city again. Somewhere down there was the subway platform where this had all started, where a stranger with dragon tattoos had stepped between her and the man who owned her fear. Thank you, she said, for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for becoming someone worth seeing. They stood on the balcony as night fell across Blackridge City, two people who'd found each other in hell and decided to build something beautiful from the ashes. 6 months later, Selene stood in the lobby of a building she'd purchased with Khalil's money and her own determination. The sign above the door read Haven House in simple letters. Inside were furnished apartments, medical facilities, legal resources, everything someone needed to escape a life they couldn't survive. The first resident had moved in 3 weeks ago, a woman with bruises that told a story Selene knew by heart. Then another, then 5 more. Word was spreading through the city's underground networks. There was a place you could go where men like Damien couldn't reach you. Kale had provided security. Armed guards who knew better than to ask questions. Lawyers who could navigate custody battles and restraining orders. Doctors who understood that some injuries didn't show on x-rays. And Selene ran it all with the same controlled intensity she'd learned from watching Kale operate. No sympathy without action, no promises she couldn't keep, just cold, effective competence that got people out alive. She was reviewing applications in her office when Jin appeared in the doorway. You have a visitor, he said. I'm not taking walk-ins today. You'll want to take this one. Jin stepped aside. Song Min-hee walked into the office, dressed in another immaculate suit, looking completely out of place in the Spartan surroundings. Selene's hand moved toward her desk drawer where she kept a loaded pistol. You're violating the treaty. This is my territory. I'm not here for violence. Min-hee sat down without invitation. I'm here because word has reached me about what you're building. This network, these safe houses, the resources you're providing. And I want to contribute. The statement was so unexpected that Selene actually laughed. You want to fund an operation that directly undermines the kind of control your organization depends on? My organization depends on profit and stability. Min-hee's voice was clinical. Men who beat their partners are unstable. They draw police attention. They create chaos. They're bad for business. She pulled an envelope from her jacket. I'm offering funding in exchange for nothing except knowing that fewer violent idiots will be operating in my territory. Selene stared at the envelope. This is insane. This is pragmatic. You've proven you can get these women out safely. I have resources you need. We both benefit from reducing chaos in the city. Min-hee set the envelope on the desk. Take it or don't, but the offer stands. She left before Selene could respond. Selene opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $500,000. She called Kyle immediately. Song Min-hee just offered to fund Haven House, she said without preamble. Kale was quiet for a moment. Did you take it? I don't know yet. Is this a trap? Probably not. Min-hee is many things, but she's not sentimental. If she's offering money, it's because she's calculated that your operation benefits her somehow. That's what she said. Fewer violent men means less chaos. Then she's probably telling the truth. Kyle sounded almost amused. Welcome to the complicated reality of running things. Sometimes your enemies fund your projects because everyone benefits from stability. That's deeply cynical. That's accurate. Selene looked at the check again. $500,000 could house and protect dozens of women. could expand operations into other cities, could build something truly transformative. I'm taking it, she decided. Good. Just remember, her money comes with invisible strings, not contractual ones, social ones. You're accepting that she's part of this city's power structure, that you'll negotiate with her rather than fight her. I can live with that. I know you can. That's why I love you. The words still made Celine's chest tighten every time Kael said them. This man who commanded empires and spoke in calculated violence loved her, trusted her, treated her like an equal partner instead of a project to be managed. I love you too, she said, even when you're being insufferably pragmatic. Especially then. Selene hung up and stared at the check. Song Min-hee's money, Kael Min's protection, her own determination. Together, they were building something that helped people survive situations she'd barely escaped herself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd become powerful by aligning with dangerous people, had learned to save others by becoming someone worth fearing, had built a refuge for the powerless using resources provided by the powerful. Nothing about it was pure or simple or morally uncomplicated, but it was real. And real was all Selene needed anymore. 1 year after boarding that subway train, Selene stood at the same platform where it had all begun. The station had been renovated. New tiles, better lighting, everything cleaner and safer than she remembered. But the bones were the same. This was where she'd run from Damien, where Kael had sat beside her without asking if she was okay, where a stranger with dragon tattoos had promised she was untouchable and then spent weeks proving it true. "Why are we here?" Kael asked, standing beside her on the empty platform. "Because I needed to see it again, to remember who I was before." "And who was that?" "Someone who thought she was nothing, who believed Damien when he said nobody would notice if she disappeared." Celine's voice was steady. "I needed to see this place and remember how wrong he was." A train pulled into the station, not the last one of the night like before, just a regular afternoon train carrying regular people living regular lives. They boarded together. Kael sat beside her in the same seat he'd occupied that first night. The train rattled into the tunnels, and Selene watched her reflection in the dark glass. The woman staring back was nothing like the terrified ghost who'd fled through the rain. This woman had scars, had killed people, had built an empire that saved lives while aligning with criminals who destroyed them. She was complicated and morally ambiguous and nothing close to innocent, but she was alive, and she was free. "What are you thinking?" Kael asked. "That I'm grateful it happened this way. As terrible as it was, as much as I wish I'd never met Damien, never spent 5 years in hell, never had to learn what it feels like to drive metal into someone's spine." Selene turned to look at him. "Because if none of that had happened, I wouldn't have become this person, wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have learned that surviving wasn't enough. I needed to become dangerous." "Regret is a luxury," Kael said. "We can't afford it." "No, but gratitude isn't. And I'm grateful for you, for what you taught me, for seeing potential in someone everyone else looked past." Kael's hand found hers. "You were always potential. I just helped you realize it." They rode the train through the city while life moved around them. Strangers with their own problems, their own struggles, their own decisions about whether to stay broken or become something else. Selene squeezed Kael's hand and thought about the women at Haven House, the ones who'd arrived bleeding and terrified, convinced they were worthless, the ones she was teaching to stand their ground the same way Kael had taught her. Some would survive and thrive. Some would return to their abusers because leaving was too hard. Some would find power in unexpected places and become dangerous themselves. All of them would make their own choices, just like Selene had. The train stopped at the transfer station where Damien had waited that first night. Selene looked out at the empty platform and felt nothing. No fear, no rage, no lingering trauma, just the cold understanding that Damien Cross was dead and she'd helped kill him and the world was better for it. "Do you think we're good people?" Selene asked. Kael considered the question. "No, but I think we're honest about what we are. That's rarer than you'd think." "What are we?" "Survivors who help other survivors, using methods that would horrify people who've never had to choose between their morals and their lives." Kael turned to face her. "We're not heroes. We're not villains. We're just people doing what we have to do to protect what matters. And what matters? You. The people we've chosen to protect. The small piece of this city we've claimed is ours. Kale's eyes held hers. Everything else is negotiable. The train carried them back across the city toward the penthouse, toward the empire they'd built together from blood and choice and refusing to ever be victims again. And Selene Vale, who'd once been invisible, forgettable, convinced nobody would ever search for her, leaned against the man she loved and understood the final truth. She'd never needed to be saved. She'd needed to learn how to save herself. Everything else had just been the cost of admission. 2 years after that subway ride, Selene woke in the penthouse bedroom to find Kyle already awake, staring at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Dawn was breaking across the skyline in shades of gold and amber. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Thinking. About? How improbable this is, you being here, us being alive, everything that had to align perfectly for this moment to exist. Selene sat up, sheets pooling around her waist. Regretting it? Never. Kyle turned from the window. But acknowledging that we got lucky. Any one of 100 variables could have gone differently and we'd both be dead. But we're not. No, we're not. Kyle crossed to the bed and sat beside her. I've been offered a legitimate business opportunity. Real estate development, city contracts, everything legal and above board. And I'm considering taking it, transitioning away from the criminal operations, building something that won't require armed guards and violence to maintain. Selene studied his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. You'd walk away from everything you built? I'd evolve it into something that doesn't require me to calculate casualty projections before breakfast. Kale's hand found hers. I'm tired, Selene. Tired of war. Tired of violence. Tired of waking up wondering which of my people won't survive the day. What about the Yong Syndicate, the treaty? Minhee is already transitioning into legitimate business herself. The treaty holds because neither of us wants to return to open warfare, but we could both operate in legal space and still maintain our positions. Would you be happy doing that? Kyle was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if happy is possible for people like us. But content? Alive? Present for something other than the next crisis? Maybe. Selene leaned against him, feeling his heartbeat through his skin. This man who'd saved her life by teaching her to save herself was offering something she'd never expected. A future that didn't require constant violence to sustain. What about Haven House? She asked. Expand it. Make it legitimate. Apply for nonprofit status and government funding. Keep doing what you're doing, but without having to launder money through shell corporations. Kale kissed her forehead. You've proven you can help people. Imagine what you could do with actual legal support. The possibility was staggering. Haven House had saved 37 women in 2 years. With legitimate funding and government partnerships, that number could be hundreds, thousands. I'm in, Selene said. If you're really doing this, if you're really walking away from the criminal empire. I am, on one condition. What? Kale pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the morning light. Marry me, he said. Not because you need protection or resources or anything I can provide, but because I love you and I want to build whatever comes next together. Selene stared at the ring, her mind struggling to process the moment. Kyle Min, the dragon-tattooed criminal lord who'd stepped between her and death on a subway platform, was proposing marriage. Yes, she said, on one condition. Name it. We do this as equals. No more protector and protected. No more you making decisions and me following. Full partners in everything. Done. Kyle slipped the ring onto her finger. You've been my equal since the night you came back for me on that rooftop. I'm just making it official. They sat together as the sun rose across Black Ridge City, two people who'd found each other in violence and decided to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The wedding was small. Jin stood as Kyle's best man. Song Min-hee attended, bringing a gift that was probably a strategic investment disguised as goodwill. The women from Haven House filled the remaining seats, watching Selene marry the man who taught her that surviving wasn't the same as living. And afterward,
At the reception held in the rebuilt penthouse, Selene stood on the balcony overlooking the city and understood something crucial. She'd become exactly what she'd needed.
Not innocent, not gentle, not anything close to the woman society said she should be, but strong, dangerous, capable of protecting herself and others without apology or hesitation. Damian Cross had spent 5 years trying to make her nothing. Instead, he'd created someone who would help countless others escape men exactly like him. The irony was perfect. Kyle appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand.
"What are you thinking?" That Damian was right about one thing. I did disappear. The woman he tried to break doesn't exist anymore.
Selene took a glass and raised it toward the city. But something better took her place. To better, Kyle said, clinking his glass against hers. To survival. To becoming untouchable. They drank while the city glowed below them. Millions of lives, thousands of stories, all of them unfolding simultaneously in the endless complexity of human existence. And Selene Vale, who'd once believed nobody would ever search for her, stood beside the man who'd proven that wrong and understood the final truth. She'd never been invisible. She'd just been waiting for someone to teach her how to be seen. Everything after that was choice, and she chose power over safety, honesty over comfort, and a dangerous life lived on her own terms over any alternative. 5 years after boarding that subway train, Selene walked through Haven House on a routine inspection. The building had expanded into 3 connected structures, 72 women currently in residence, medical staff, lawyers, counselors. Everything someone needed to escape and rebuild. She stopped at one room where a young woman sat on the bed, bruises darkening her face, fear radiating from every inch of her body. Selene recognized that fear, had worn it like a second skin for 5 years. "Hi," Selene said gently. "I'm Selene. Welcome to Haven House." The woman looked up, eyes hollow. "They said I'd be safe here." "You will be, I promise." "He'll find me. He always finds me." "Not here. Not anymore." Selene sat down beside her. "I know it doesn't feel possible right now. I know you think he's too powerful, too connected, too persistent. I thought the same thing once." "What changed?" "I learned that being afraid of someone and being powerless against them aren't the same thing." Selene met the woman's eyes. "And I learned that survival isn't about hiding. It's about becoming someone they can't hurt anymore." "How?" "By taking it one day at a time. By accepting help. By understanding that who you were when you walked through that door doesn't have to be who you are 6 months from now." Selene stood. "Rest. Heal. And when you're ready, we'll teach you how to make sure you never have to run again." She left the room and continued her inspection, checking security protocols and resident welfare with the same controlled precision Kyle had taught her. That evening, she returned to the penthouse to find Kyle working at his desk, reviewing contracts for his latest development project. Legitimate business, city approved, everything legal and documented. He looked up when she entered. "How was Haven House?" "Good. New resident today. Reminds me of myself 5 years ago." "Will she make it?"
"I don't know. Some do, some don't. All I can do is provide resources and hope they choose to use them." Selene crossed to the window. "Do you ever think about that night, the subway?" "Every day." "Regret it?" "Never." Kale stood and joined her at the window. "You changed my life, Selene. Made me remember that power without purpose is just violence. That protecting people matters more than controlling territory. You changed mine first."
"We changed each other." Kyle wrapped his arms around her from behind. "And now we're here, building legitimate businesses, helping people, living something almost resembling a normal life." "It's boring sometimes," Selene admitted. "Yes. I miss the adrenaline occasionally." "So do I. But I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Neither would I." They stood together watching the city below, the empire they'd claimed through blood and choice, now sustained through entirely legal means. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was theirs. And Selene Vale, who'd started her journey as an invisible ghost convinced she was worthless, had become exactly what she'd always needed to be. Dangerous enough to survive, strong enough to help others do the same, free enough to choose her own path, and loved enough to know she'd never be alone again. The dragon and the ghost, the criminal lord and the woman he'd saved by teaching her to save herself. Together, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of violence. And when Selene finally fell asleep that night in Kael's arms, she dreamed not of subway platforms and blood-soaked rooftops, but of all the women she'd help tomorrow, all the lives she'd change, all the invisible people she'd teach to be seen. Because that was her purpose now. Not revenge, not survival, not even justice. Just the simple, powerful truth that nobody should have to disappear to stay alive. And Selene Vale would spend the rest of her life making sure they didn't have to, one woman at a time, one choice at a time, one transformation at a time, until the world understood what she'd learned in blood and fire and desperate choices made in the darkness. That survivors didn't need saving, they needed tools. And Selene Vale had become the best toolmaker in the city.